Welcome, everybody. We're going to have yet another great late night conversation. Glad that you're here.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. Wow. A lot to talk about, obviously, and we're going to talk about all of it. But before I begin, I do want to mention that this stream will follow our standard live stream format, which is first I give opening remarks. Then from there, we do a roll call. We find out who's watching, names and locations. That's always fun. And then after that, I answer any questions that you all have for the remainder of the show. So if you've got something you would like me to talk about in the second half of the show, the best thing to do would be to send me a buy me a coffee. Go to buy me a coffee, Caleb Maupin. You can send me any questions you've got. You can send Rumble rants as well if you're on the Rumble, and you can cash at me at Caleb Maupin 22. Those are the different ways you can reach me with questions for the second half of the show. We are having an event coming up in New Jersey. It's going to be a great event. The links to register for the event, to attend the event, are down below. It's starting to get full, but hey, maybe register. And, we did not expect it to be as big as it's going to be. And in light of recent events, it's probably going to be even bigger than we had originally planned. So we're trying to figure everything out, but we are having an event in New Jersey, January 11th. Link is down below. So yeah, as I said before, 3 ways to send questions. So if you got questions for the second half of the show, I know a number of people have already sent coffee questions over the last few days. So, those will be answered first, but send your questions. Send your questions for the second half of the program. Buy me a coffee is the best way. You can Rumble rant, you can Cash App, but the best way is to buy me a coffee. So let's just jump right into it. I thought I would begin tonight's stream with a quotation. Today's been a difficult day. As you can see, I haven't even changed out of my suit and tie. I was in the streets all day in the cold. First, I was down by the federal courthouse, and then I was in Times Square, where there were demonstrations of both people that supported Nicolas Maduro and Venezuela and people that were opposing it. It's been quite a day. So I've got a lot to say, but I want us all to just take a minute and breathe with me. Just breathe with me for 1 minute. Just breathe. Just breathe with me. Because on days like this, it's very easy to just get caught up in it. And to lose track of why we're doing all of this, to get very emotional and upset and to react and to just react and just run, react, yell, point. And there'll be some of that tonight. Don't get me wrong. There'll certainly be plenty of that tonight. But we need to just breathe for a moment, to just breathe. Just breathe and talk about why we're here. And I actually wanted to start out with a quotation. And it's a quotation that actually will probably surprise all of you because it's not from a source I bet you all are expecting. But I'll put the quotation on the screen. This is a quote I came across this week, kind of randomly, but it really spoke to me. And it's from the novelist, the fantasy and sci-fi writer C.S. Lewis. He wrote, "Confronted with a cancer or a slum, the pantheist can say, if you could only see it from the divine point of view, you would realize that this also is God. But the Christian replies, don't talk damned nonsense. For Christianity is a fighting religion. It thinks God made the world, but it also thinks that a great many things have gone wrong with the world that God made, and that God insists, and insists very loudly, on our putting them right again." Now, I found that quote to be particularly profound, because there are many, many people out there that will tell you that it is your duty to just accept the world as it is. It is your duty to just tolerate it, and that is somehow what it means to be religious. And C.S. Lewis, in his interpretation of the Bible, is saying that actually, no, the Christian faith preaches that one has an obligation to intervene in history, to make the world right. I find that to be very, very profound. And the reason that it speaks to me is because I've been to Venezuela. I visited Venezuela in 2015. And having been to Venezuela, having studied their revolution and what they've been through since 1998 when Hugo Chavez was first elected, I can help you understand a number of different things. First thing I can help you understand is why they kidnapped Nicolas Maduro. Because it's not as simple as you might think. There are many layers to this that we'll have to explore tonight. The next thing I'm going to help you understand is why the Venezuelan government isn't going to collapse. And the next thing I'm going to help you understand is what we can do about it here in America, and what in the world this has to do with America. What does this have to do with America? The Venezuelan government that currently exists came out of the struggle against austerity. In the 1990s, Venezuela was a very poor country, and there were a huge amount of cuts in public services. In 1989, they cut the price of public transportation. There was a huge riot in the capital city of Caracas, and the riot was known as the Caracazo, right? And mods, there's plenty of trolls in there tonight, so just start clearing them out, right? Just start clearing them out. Anyone who comes in who's not here for the right reasons, just start clearing them out. We don't need that. They're a distraction. So people in the chat that are mods, if you see people that are, having a bad attitude about world events instead, just clear them out. Just clear them out. But Venezuela was a very poor country. There were cuts in public services, and there was an uprising called the Caracazo, and there were strikes. And in the very, very poor areas of Venezuela, the people realized if they were going to get basic services, they had to organize. For example, the electricity would go out routinely. And so the people in central Caracas, in certain neighborhoods, they stopped going to work, and they organized strikes until the power came back on. The garbage wouldn't be collected. So the community organizations would start collecting the garbage themselves, and then they would drive to the rich neighborhood and dump it onto the highway. And then they would start collecting garbage. And to just get the electricity to come on and to just have the garbage collected, the people of Venezuela had to organize protests and demonstrations. What's interesting is that story about how when the garbage wasn't being collected, and how the garbage wouldn't be collected for weeks, and then the They started collecting it themselves and dumped it on a major highway in a rich neighborhood. I heard a very, very, very similar story when I was living in Cleveland from a professor, an African-American man who grew up in Harlem. When I was in Cleveland, there was a professor at Cleveland State University who hosted a gathering of the new Black Panther Party. And he actually faced a lot of pressure for doing so because the new Black Panther Party is called anti-Semitic. And he allowed the new Black Panther Party to come to Cleveland State University. He reserved a room for them. And he welcomed the new Black Panthers at Cleveland State University. And he gave a speech about why. And he said a very similar thing. He said he grew up in Harlem, and he remembered in the early 70s in Harlem, there was a week where the garbage was never collected. And so the Black Panthers went through the neighborhood and they collected the garbage. And then they took it to a major intersection around 25th Street and they piled it in the middle of the street and lit it on fire. And after that, the city started collecting their garbage again. And it's those kind of community struggles. People did this in Harlem in the 1970s. They did it in Venezuela in the 1990s. It was these kinds of community struggles that gave birth to the Bolivarian movement. There's a very good book by a professor named Chigarello Mar, and he wrote a book called We Created Chavez, which I would recommend. It's actually one of the good books, the best books on the history of Bolivarianism in Venezuela. And it was about where Hugo Chavez came from. That there was a mass movement in Venezuela against austerity and against cuts in public services and demanding that the electricity come on, demanding that the garbage be collected, demanding that teachers not get laid off, demanding that the price of public utilities not be hugely expensive, demanding that basic services be provided, demanding education. And that Venezuela, like a lot of South and Central American countries, you have cities like Caracas, where there's schools, where there's roads, where there's electricity. But until very recently, in a lot of the country, you had indigenous people in the countryside who only spoke the Spanish language, who did not have electricity, who did not have running water, who did not have education, and only spoke indigenous languages, and they were invisible. They did not vote. They did not get a say in how the country was run. They were just considered invisible by society. What happened? Well, in the 1990s, things got to be so bad, and the economy was bad, and they had a riot in 1989, and they had big protests and rebellions. And in 1992, a leader of the military named Hugo Chavez, who called himself a Bolivarian after Simon Bolivar, right? Simon Bolivar was the anti-colonial hero of Latin America. He tried to pull off a military coup because the people were so angry. And he said, I'll have the military take over the government and I'll fix the economy. Didn't work. He was thrown in prison, but he was so popular that after 5-6 years in jail, they let him out. And he said, okay, I tried to take power in a military coup. I tried to take power violently. Now I'm going to take power peacefully. And he ran for office on a platform of the third way, neither capitalism or socialism. He said, whatever is best for Venezuela, right? I'm not for capitalism, but I'm not for socialism. I'm for the best way for the country. And that's how he got elected. And his political party was called the Movement for the Fifth Republic. They said they needed a new constitution that would more accurately represent the people. And the reason Hugo Chavez got elected was because there were a lot of people in the country who had never voted before, but were really suffering. And a lot of these indigenous folks in the countryside and a lot of the working class people in the urban centers, they went out and voted for Hugo Chavez because the election was basically a referendum. Are you for the cuts in public spending? Are you for the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank? Or are you against it? And Hugo Chavez said, look, I'm not a communist, I'm not a socialist, but I'm against the cuts. And the people running against him, they said, we need to do business with America. We need to follow the International Monetary Fund. The Soviet Union has collapsed. Capitalism is the new way, the end of history. And so if we need to keep getting loans and the international bankers and the monetary fund tells us we've got to cut our public services, why? That's what we've got to do. And that was the election. And Hugo Chavez won the election on a platform of, I will stop the cuts in public services. That's how he won the election. And then he got elected, and what happened? There was mudslides in the country. A wave of mudslides hit the country. Venezuela's got a lot of hills, a lot of mountains. And it was poor people who lived in the mountains that their homes got swept away. The mudslides displaced them. And then something happened in the country that had never happened before, which is the president got on television and he said, our people have been hurt in these mudslides. We got to help them. We got to rescue them. And so he mobilized the army, and he sent the army to help the people who'd suffered in the mudslides. That had never happened before. And he called on the people to volunteer. And he said, I want you to form community assemblies, Bolivarian circles, to help with the relief of the mudslides. And people were like, wow. And so in the aftermath of these mudslides, the army was mobilized to go in and rescue people. And the population was organized into community assemblies to help with it. And people were really excited. And this is actually very similar to another leader in Latin American history, Juan Perón. Juan Perón, who's kind of the national hero of Argentina. He was a military general who did a very similar thing. There was an earthquake, and he was a military commander who sent the military to help the people during the earthquake. And that's how Juan Perón became popular in Argentina. Hugo Chavez was a military guy. He'd been elected president, and he pulled a page from Juan Perón, and he sent the army to help people. And that made him very, very popular very, very quickly, especially with the kind of poor people that were displaced by the mudslides and with the army, right? The army was no longer viewed as a group of guys who, robbed and raped and looted and pillaged. They were viewed as heroes. They're helping people in a national mudslide. The military, people looked up to the army. The army in Venezuela had a reputation for being corrupt, had a reputation for committing atrocities. There was kind of a counterinsurgency in the 70s and 80s. They were fighting communist rebels, and they would rob people and take bribes and all of that. But now people liked the army. People liked the army. And when soldiers would walk around in their uniforms, people would applaud for them and say, that's our army that helps people when they get caught up in the mudslides. And Venezuelans were full of patriotism. Love for their homeland, love for their country, love for their military. And their president was a former paratrooper, a guy who had come up the ranks of the military. And he called himself a Bolivarian, right? That'd be like the equivalent of calling yourself a Lincolnist in America or a Washingtonian, right? And he was ultra patriotic for Venezuela. And he said, I'm going to use the military and the government to help people. And after the wave of mudslides in the country, after that, he then put his proposal for a new constitution up for a vote, and it passed overwhelmingly. He was very popular because he used the military to help people. And then 9/11 happened. You remember 9/11? And Venezuela sent condolences to America after 9/11. But then the USA invaded Afghanistan. And Hugo Chavez got on television. And he got on TV. And he showed a picture of a dead child. And he said, look, 9/11 was awful. Yeah, but it doesn't justify this, right? This little child who got killed by U.S. bombs, she didn't have anything to do with 9/11. And the USA doesn't have the right to invade Afghanistan, right? Afghanistan was willing to turn over bin Laden. They just wanted to process him through their own courts first. No, this is not right. And he stood alone. It was not an easy thing to do. The international community seemed to be supporting the USA invading Afghanistan. NATO was for it, but Maduro's predecessor, Hugo Chavez, opposed the bombing of Afghanistan and supported it, and supported the Afghan people against it. And then, because of the fact that the Communist Party had been part of the people that mobilized the strikes and the protests, Hugo Chavez appointed a communist, one single communist, to his cabinet as a favor to the Communist Party. The Communist Party in Venezuela is a very big political party, and it was back then a very large political party. They ran a lot of labor unions, etc. And so as a favor to the Communist Party, he appointed one communist, just one, to his cabinet. And that was too much. And they overthrew Hugo Chavez in a military coup. And the military ousted Hugo Chavez. He was arrested. taken to an island, and they were going to kill him. But he was rescued by an uprising of rank-and-file soldiers. Rank-and-file soldiers re-seized the presidential palace, rescued him, and put him back into office. It was huge. It was a huge turnaround. For a few days, Venezuela was under the control of a U.S.-backed dictator who seized power in a coup. But then Hugo Chavez was brought back to power because he was popular with the military, with the soldiers. And after Hugo Chavez was back, he was wildly popular. And then he said, you know, I've had a change of heart. I think that we need to start moving toward 21st century socialism. That's the words that he used. Started hiring Cuban doctors. He used the Venezuelan oil money to hire Cuban doctors to come and start providing medical care to people. And one of the main things that the Venezuelan government did in its early years was restore people's eyesight, because there were many Venezuelans, there were at that time, who could not see because they had conditions brought on by their poverty. They couldn't see, and that basic eye surgery would bring them their eyesight back. And the Cuban doctors set up shop, and all over the impoverished areas, all over the poor areas of Venezuela, they started giving people their eyesight back. I believe there's a figure in the Bible who got his eyesight healed by Jesus, right? And that's who the project was named after. And one thing I will tell you, having been to Venezuela, the socialist movement in Venezuela is very, very, very religious. It's very, very religious. You know, the people who troll have no idea, right? Abortion is illegal in Venezuela. Gay marriage is also illegal in Venezuela, but it's beyond that. Hugo Chavez, in his speeches, he said that Jesus Christ is the greatest socialist in all of history. He said that that Judas Iscariot is the capitalist. You know, and the socialism in Venezuela, Bolivarian socialism, was always very Christian in its orientation, always very Roman Catholic. And Venezuela used state-run oil money to build up their economy, right? They had the highest oil prices in history at that point. The USA invaded Iraq and shot the oil prices up. As a result, the oil prices were very high. Oil revenue was at an all-time high. They renationalized the Venezuelan oil, so the money would actually go into the Venezuelan budget. And as a result, they had a lot of government money, and they started building. And they built huge modern housing complexes, and they launched a program so that every child would get a musical instrument that they could learn to play in school. And I mean, what they did was amazing, and they were using government oil money. And actually, this is one thing that the U.S. media always leaves out, right? Venezuela's had their fair share of economic problems since 2014, but Hugo Chavez took power in 1999. And I can read you Wall Street Journal articles where they talk about how in 2013 and 2012, quote, the party was still on. An orgy of construction was going on. How they wiped out illiteracy in the country. The United Nations actually honored Venezuela for how quickly they wiped out illiteracy. No country had ever done it as quickly as they had. They just moved those Cuban volunteers in there, and adult illiteracy was wiped out. It was unprecedented. And they electrified the country, and they did amazing things. I walked through a neighborhood in central Caracas where every single house was paid for by an interest-free loan provided by the Venezuelan government. Every single house. And I walked through streets. I saw a community center, beautiful, beautiful community center they have in a poor neighborhood in central Caracas. And, they said before this beautiful community center where they have high school graduations and the kids put on plays, before this was here, this used to be the empty lot where car thieves would come and take their cars and break them up and break apart the parts to sell. And this is where the heroin dealers used to set up shop. And now it's this beautiful, beautiful community center. And they used state control of oil revenue to build up their economy. And if you talked to the South American right wing, they told you exactly what they were all about, right? For example, I will never forget when I was in college, right? There were a group of students at my college from Brazil, right? Brazil is a South American country. They speak Portuguese rather than Spanish. And at that point, Lula da Silva had won the elections in Brazil. And he was at that point aligned with Hugo Chavez, was presenting himself as a socialist. And these students at my college, they were from Brazil. And so I asked them, what do you think of Lula da Silva? And they said, oh, he's horrible. He's horrible. He's horrible. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, he's awful, horrible. And I said, why? Why is he horrible? And they said, oh, he used to deliver packages for a living. He used to be a delivery man. I said, what? And they said, we're a civilized nation in Brazil. And this president we have used to deliver packages. This is humiliating. We're represented by a vulgar poor person who used to deliver packages. It's horrible, they said. And he's horrible. He's horrible. And I said to them, well, if he's so horrible, why do people vote for him? Why does he win the elections? They said, well, the reason Lula da Silva wins the elections is because we have this law in Brazil that everybody has to vote. And I said, what do you mean? It's true. In Brazil, it is a law that you must vote in order to prevent election fraud, because if you don't vote, someone could vote in your place. It is by law, everyone in Brazil is required to vote. So they said, so because of this stupid law that we have that everybody has to vote, all these poor people and all these uneducated people and all these black people and all these native people and all these uncivilized, dirty people, they all vote. And I was like, uh-huh. And that's why he wins the elections, because all these stupid people who shouldn't be voting vote. And I was like, oh, okay. I said, but why do they vote for him? And they said, oh, because he gives them all jobs. I said, he gives them all jobs. And they said, yeah, he gives them all jobs. Right? I mean, he just gives them jobs, and so they vote for him. Why isn't that illegal? That's like bribery, they told me. It's like bribery. You just give somebody a job, then they vote for you. Very honest, right? And that's what Miami Cubans think about Fidel Castro, even though Fidel Castro grew up in relative luxury, but he's taking care of the poor people. That's what the right-wing Nicaraguans think about Daniel Ortega, right? There is a blatant racism that South America was colonized, and that, in America, when it comes to racism, right, we got the 1-drop rule, 1 drop of black blood and you're black. It's not like that in South and Central America. Right? It's more of a shadeism. The lighter you are, the better you are. The darker you are, the more inferior you are considered in the old-fashioned way, right? And if you look at the people who ran South and Central America until like the 90s, they all had my skin tone, right? And they spoke with Spanish accents, and they all had my skin tone. And the somewhat poorer people looked a little closer to me, but a little browner. And the most poor people were the black people and the indigenous people. And that's the way it was until recently. And what has changed in the 1990s, and the reason you had what they call the pink tide, with the rise of Lula da Silva, with the rise of Cristina Kirchner, with the rise of Evo Morales, the reason you had that, right, is because of the fact that those people that had been erased and had been ignored by society, they were suddenly voting. That because of the fact that in the 90s, the military dictatorships in Latin America softened, right, and because of the fact that you now had open societies where austerity could be imposed, right? It was austerity. A lot of these black and brown people could vote, and they voted in their economic interest against austerity, and they started winning. And Venezuela had oil, and the oil prices were the highest they'd been. And what started in Venezuela with Hugo Chavez spread all over the continent, right? And you had the pink tide. You had a wave of socialist governments coming into power. Now, that is where the Venezuelan government comes from. And that is their origin as an anti-austerity movement, as a populist movement led by a military leader, as an ultra-patriotic movement that wanted to take control of the oil and use it for the benefit of the country. That's where Venezuela, their current government comes from. Now, what changed? This is really important to understand what's happening. I went to Venezuela in 2015. What happened? Well, Hugo Chavez had just died. And the USA at that point put the screws onto Venezuela. They hit them with some of the most insane sanctions you would ever believe. They stole just loads of Venezuelan government money, was just stolen out of British banks, out of American banks, right? That's one thing about Wall Street, is all the countries in the world, they all, keep their money in American Wall Street banks. That's how they invest. And so, when the USA wants to stick it to a country, it just steals their money. Millions, billions of dollars of Venezuelan money was just stolen. And on top of that, they put crazy sanctions. No one was allowed to do business with Venezuela. And as a result of that, Venezuela was suffering. But then Barack Hussein Obama made a deal with Saudi Arabia and he dropped the oil prices. And suddenly all of that oil revenue that was providing all paying for the huge state sector that Hugo Chavez built dried up. So the amount of government oil revenue, the amount of government money drastically decreased. And as a result of that, Venezuela really, really suffered. And I went there in 2015 in the eye of the storm. And they planned it. They planned it because there were a lot of people who loved Hugo Chavez. But Nicolas Maduro, they didn't know him as well. Hugo Chavez had been the charismatic guy who'd been the leader of the revolution, but he died. And Nicolas Maduro, who was in office, was new. Now, I'll tell you about Nicolas Maduro, right? I'll tell you about Nicolas Maduro. Nicolas Maduro was a bus driver. He's a tall guy. I have been in his presence at the United Nations, and he's a tall guy. He's like a linebacker. He's a huge, huge man. And he was the leader of the bus drivers union for many years. He was a leader of the bus drivers union. He drove a bus for a living. He represented the public workers, the bus drivers. And I first heard of Nicolas Maduro when I was living in New York City in 2011. Why? Because I rented from a family of Honduran diplomats, right? There was like a left government in Honduras until 2009. And so there were like diplomats who got fired. And I was in a communist group. I was living with a family of Honduran diplomats. And I was over at their house one day, and they had over for coffee a Venezuelan diplomat, somebody from the Venezuelan consulate. And they saw me there, and I must have been wearing a communist shirt or something like that. And we got to talking about communist politics with the Venezuelan, diplomats and the Honduran diplomats. And I'm sitting there in the living room. And I asked the Venezuelan diplomat, I said to her, what do you think of the Partido Bandera Roja, the red flag party of Venezuela? And she laughed and she said, well, I used to be on the national committee. I said, really? And I guess, yeah, the Partido Bandera Roja is one of the communist parties in Venezuela. She said, I used to be on the national committee in the 1980s. She said they were a very, very good group back then. Now they're just kind of crazy. They're an ultra-left party or whatever she said. But yeah, I used to be on the national committee. And then she said, and so was Nicolas Maduro. And I said, who? I didn't know who that was. She said, the vice president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. That's the first time I ever heard Maduro's name. And she said, yeah, the vice president of Venezuela, he used to be on the national committee of the Partido Bandera Roja. I was like, wow. And, Nicolas Maduro is a lifelong communist activist, leader of the bus drivers union. And he was part of that movement that fought for the rights of public workers, that fought against the cuts in public spending, that fought against the electricity not coming on, and fought against the garbage not being delivered. And he, from going back to the 80s, going back to the 70s, that's what he was. He was an activist, and he's a large guy. He could be a football player. He's a huge guy, and he's not light-skinned. He's dark-skinned, right? He's not, I wouldn't say he's black. He's not black. He's not full-on indigenous, but he's a brown-skinned fellow. And he's a leader of the bus drivers union. And and he was involved in many strikes. He's a community organizer. He's an activist. He's been in communist organizations before. That's Nicolas Maduro. That's when I first heard of Nicolas Maduro. And when I went to Venezuela in 2015, Maduro was very unpopular because all the cuts in public spending that had to come when the oil revenue dropped, they hit people pretty badly. And Hugo Chavez had been very popular, but he died. And so there were a lot of Venezuelans that were frustrated with, nepotism or corruption. They felt like government jobs were not being handed out fairly. They felt that, it was very hard to get toilet paper, and there was food shortages in the country imposed by all these sanctions and all of that. And Nicolas Maduro was the new president who was just not as popular as Hugo Chavez. And it was interesting. I was there in the 2015 elections, and I spoke to many Venezuelans who voted for the opposition, but told me they were socialists, right? And this is the whole thing, right? All these dumb people, they say, oh, the Venezuelans actually lived under communism and socialism. They hate it. Well, I actually talked to people in the elections of Venezuela, and many of the people in the opposition said, we are socialists. We just don't like Maduro. We think Maduro has antagonized America too much. We think Maduro is corrupt or whatever, but we love socialism. No. I didn't meet anybody going around Venezuela, except for some of the people in the very wealthy neighborhoods who were saying, oh, yeah, we want free market capitalism back. We want to privatize it. I didn't hear anybody saying that, right? The opposition leader, and Enrique Capriles, and the Democratic Roundtable Group, they all said, we're socialists too, just not the bad kind. That was their argument. So anyone who tries to give you that, oh, all the Venezuelans know what socialism's all about. No, they all love socialism. Even the opposition loves socialism. They just, and I was there in 2015 when things were very bad, but even they were saying they were socialists too, right? And so don't give me that, right? Just don't give me that. These people that talk out their ass, these Fox News viewers, they don't know what they're talking about. They just don't, right? I mean, the opposition were calling themselves socialists too when I was there in 2015. They just didn't like Maduro. But the reason that they ratcheted up everything right after the death of Hugo Chavez was because Hugo Chavez had been holding the revolution together. And I heard this. I met with socialist activists and organizers and people who they said Chavez was their father. And they watched Chavez on TV every day. They say Chavez raised us, they felt this loyalty to Chavez. So with the new leader in that was new, that people didn't have as much familiarity with, that's when they could, at that point, ratchet up their opposition. They figured the new guy isn't as popular. The Bolivarian movement is divided. But what happened, right? In 2015, there was just economic difficulty and suffering, and there was an attempted coup that was defeated. There was another attempted coup that was defeated. They had a campaign called La Salida, where they were trying to violently overthrow the Venezuelan government. I mean, this Venezuelan opposition, folks, they are terrorists, okay? They are terrorists, right? And they complain about a food crisis. They were going around lighting food warehouses on fire because they wanted to impoverish people, right? Don't let any of these Venezuelan folks tell you anything different. They went around lighting food warehouses on fire because they wanted to create a food crisis, right? They openly do that. And the ones that are in America are actively lobbying for more sanctions. They want to starve their own people. So how can they talk like, communism's so bad because it's starving people? Well, if you're advocating more sanctions on the country, that sounds like you like the people starving there, don't you? And it's like, they don't care about their own people. Right. They really don't. They are regime change activists. Right. If Black Lives Matter had strung wires across intersections to cut off the heads of cops on motorcycles, we would call them terrorists. But that's what the Venezuelan opposition was doing. That's what Leopoldo Lopez was doing. If Black Lives Matter or Occupy Wall Street or the Tea Party or some radical movement in America was bombing buses and blowing up school buses, we would call them terrorists. That's what the Venezuelan opposition was doing. If you had a political group in America that blew up universities, right? We would call them terrorists, right? I mean, that generally, if people engage in violence that targets civilians, that targets police officers and public servants in order to get their way because they can't win the elections, we call them terrorists. And let's talk about Venezuela's elections. Do you know who said that Venezuela had a very, very clean electoral system? Jimmy Carter. Yeah, the Carter Center monitored Venezuela's elections and said they are clean and transparent. I have been to Venezuela and I have seen how clean and transparent their elections are. And you know how you can tell that the Venezuelan elections are clean and transparent? Because the opposition doesn't participate. They don't participate because they know they'll lose, right? They know that they won't win. And so rather than participate, they just declare, oh, these are not real elections. And then they don't win. And they say, oh, look, we don't win. In 2015, I was in Caracas and they had an election in Venezuela. And I was lucky that I was there in 2015 because that is the only time in Venezuela since 1999 that they've had an election and there hasn't been a huge amount of rioting afterwards. And you know why? Because the opposition won. That was the election. The opposition won control. And for some reason, there was no rioting afterwards. But it generally in Venezuela, every time Hugo Chavez won the election, every time Maduro won the election, the rich kids would go out and burn buildings, and all the CIA people would bomb school buses and just be unbelievably violent. But for once, the opposition won control of the National Assembly, no violence. So that tells you right there where the violence is coming from, right? That right there tells you where the violence in Venezuela is coming from. But I was there and I talked to people. And again, I talked to a lot of people who were mad at Nicolas Maduro because they didn't like, they felt like when the government revenue, the oil revenue had decreased, it wasn't being resolved fairly, right? And that's going to happen. And the other thing is that in impoverished countries, you tend to have more of a culture of corruption. If somebody has a government job, they're expected to take care of their neighbors and their coworkers, et cetera. So, there is more of a culture of nepotism and, stuff like that. And that develops in impoverished countries. People have to take care of each other. Recently in Chinese media, there's this thing about kill line. Read about kill line. It was a phrase that was going viral in Chinese media about how in America, right, there are certain life events that can happen to you and you can become homeless, right? If you get in a car accident, if you have a medical emergency, if you lose a job, right? One thing can lead to another, and then suddenly you're homeless out on the street. And in China is a much poorer country than America. Most of the people in China have nowhere near the American standard of living, but they won't become homeless from a car accident. And they won't become homeless from simply losing a job. They're not on their own. There is more of a culture of people taking care of each other. But in the West, we don't have that. And as the economy gets worse and as the living standard drops, we're now learning that we don't have a culture like they do in a lot of impoverished countries where people learn to take care of each other. And as a result, in America, we have the kill line where, hey, if your living standard, you lose a job, you get a chronic illness, right? You have a car accident, you're screwed. And a lot of Americans live in terror. They're just 2 or 3 paychecks away from being homeless, from being destitute, from, and in countries where the poverty has been there for generations, people learn to take care of each other to make sure that doesn't happen, right? You get more of a culture of collectivism because people have to do it to survive. But in America, we don't have that. And so as our living standards are going down, people are just kind of left on their own. And so in countries like Venezuela that have been impoverished countries for a long time, people take care of each other. Well, generally, that's considered nepotism. That's corruption, right? If somebody's taking care of you, if a police officer is taking care of you and fixing your tickets, or a government employee is making sure you get first dibs on something that's rationed or something like that, that's corruption. But again, that's what people that are impoverished learn to do. They learn to take care of each other. And don't pretend that the rich corporations and bankers that run this country don't take care of each other. Don't pretend that, the Democrats and the Republicans don't hand out the goods and hand out the government contracts and take care of each other too, right? That happens, but in an impoverished country, people learn to take care of each other. So when the amount of government revenue drastically decreases, when that happens, you get a situation where suddenly people that don't have as much access to the goods and services that are being kind of nepotistically handed out, they get very, very angry. And that's what I saw when I was in Venezuela in 2015. But nobody said they wanted to get rid of social programs and have the free market. And nobody said, oh, I want capitalism back, right? It was more like, we don't feel like things are being handled properly. That's what I heard from people. And the goal then was to overthrow Maduro. But what happened? Maduro survived. They tried to overthrow him in one coup, and he survived. They tried to overthrow him in another coup. He survived. They built militias all over the country. And at this point, Maduro is their national symbol. And Maduro was quite unpopular when he first took office. People said he could never be like Hugo Chavez. Now, he's very popular because they made him the symbol. And that's the thing. The USA was saying, Maduro's a dictator. You got to give up Maduro. So the people who said, we don't appreciate the USA sanctioning us and preventing us from importing our own oil and exporting our oil, and we don't appreciate the USA blocking us from importing food to our country, the people rallied around Maduro. He became the symbol of holding the country together in the face of an all-out onslaught and siege. And so Maduro, who was not that popular when he first took office, became more and more popular. The more they attacked the country, the more popular he became. They sanctioned the country. They tried to overthrow him in a coup. They declared that Venezuela wasn't allowed to do business with Iran. They kidnapped Alex Saab, the diplomat. And all that times they did that, Maduro became more and more popular. And now Maduro is right back where Hugo Chavez was. He was the symbol of the country, the national resistance figure. And because of that, he's very popular. So that's why the U.S. government decided they had to kidnap him, because he's the symbol, right? The symbol of the country. This is about trying to impose national humiliation onto Venezuela. This is about trying to divide and weaken the Bolivarian movement. They saw what Hugo Chavez did, and they were hoping that Maduro would never fulfill that role. But now Maduro does fulfill that role. Now he is the symbol of Venezuela standing up to Western imperialism. And he got them through the food crisis. He got them through the worst part. And, Iran has supermarkets in Venezuela. And so now they are just trying to eradicate the national leader of the country. That's what they're trying to do. And they're trying to psychologically cut off the Bolivarian revolution at the top, right? This is a sick game of national humiliation. And one thing that I can tell you, right? I've been in Maduro's presence before. I've never talked to him. I can tell you that Maduro is sincere. And you know why I can tell you? Because of what Marco Rubio said. Marco Rubio said, look, we offered Maduro to step down. We offered him to step down, and he could be living literally anywhere right now, but he wanted to be big boy. And so that's right. They offered him to just retire somewhere and live on the beach. They offered him to just, step down and go. He refused to do it. He risked being dragged to where he is now. He'd risked being dragged to a U.S. prison because he knew that he played a vital role as the linchpin, as the center of the anti-colonial revolution in Venezuela. And that if he did that, if he did step down, it would lead to the overthrow. It would lead to chaos in Venezuela. He knew the role he was playing was so important that he put himself on the line. That's the point, right? Listen to Marco Rubio admits it. If he was just a con man, they're saying, oh, he's a drug dealer, he's a con. If he was just a con man, he would have done it. If he was just a con man, he would have stepped down and retired to Costa Rica and bought a big mansion. He didn't do it. He made them drag him to New York City because he believes in what he's doing. He's been doing this since he was a young man, leading the bus drivers unions, and I'll tell you, if he really was just a con man and a grifter, like we're told that he is, he would have stepped down to avoid what they're doing. He knew this was a possibility. And you saw him when they were threatening him. He went around the country dancing and rallying the people and saying, I ain't going nowhere. Right. And Marco Rubio, who's got drug dealers in his family, is tied in with that Miami Mafia, that corrupt Miami Mafia. Marco Rubio, the Trump administration that just pardoned the drug dealing Honduran leader. You know, they just can't stand. They just can't stand. They just can't stand Nicolas Maduro because he's sincere, right? And I'll tell you one thing, right? You know, these phony politicians, the last thing that they can stand is a sincere person. And we'll talk more about that later. But I'll tell you, I've been to Venezuela. I've seen it up close. And I'm telling you that I don't know what Trump is smoking. All right. I listened to Trump today, and I mean, you know, it's one thing. So you kidnapped the leader of a sovereign nation because you charged him with something. So, I mean, I guess now the U.S. government can do this to anybody, right? You know, what if another country did that to us, right? Trump's accused of all kinds of awful things. So what if China just said, you know what, we consider Trump to be a drug dealer, and grabbed Trump and took him to Beijing? Would we be okay with that? I don't think so. What if Russia said, you know what, we consider Trump to be a bunch of bad things, and they just grabbed him and put him on trial in Moscow? There's absolutely no legitimacy to this, right? I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. You cannot grab a foreign leader from another country on charges. This is absolutely ridiculous, right? It's absolutely ridiculous. And there's absolutely no legitimacy to this. But, you know, regardless, he would have avoided this if he was purely a selfish person. If it wasn't for the fact that he has done the work year after year after year, building the movement, organizing the Venezuelan people, he would have avoided this and stepped down. He's true to his principles. Now, the woman who is now leading Venezuela, the vice president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, she's an interesting one. Now, she is the daughter of a very famous communist leader in Venezuela, her father. Right, her father was the leader of a socialist group, was very famous, and her father was martyred. Actually, he was kidnapped by the Venezuelan police and tortured and died. Right, he died of a heart attack officially, but he died, you know, after being tortured. And she is kind of, considered royalty in the left of Venezuela, right? And Delcy Rodriguez is now running the country, and they're in pretty good hands. She's a pretty effective woman, and she's been, like Maduro, fighting against imperialism and colonialism her whole life, and organizing. And I think that she will do a good job. And honestly, I'll tell you what, I think that Maduro may actually be returned to Venezuela. I don't think it's over, right? Honestly, I think that Trump did this in a way that was very weak, right? Now, at this point, if say Obama had done this or Biden had done this, there probably would have been widespread support for it. But because Trump is such a polarizing figure, because Trump is at odds with the NATO countries, because the Colombian leader is supporting Nicolas Maduro and all of that, I actually think there's a very good chance that Maduro will be returned to Venezuela. And that seizing him, he's a bargaining chip. But anyhow, we got a number of other things to talk about. I do want to remind you all that if you got something for me to talk about in the second half of our show, you can send me a Rumble rant or Cash App, but the best way to do it is to buy me a coffee. A few people have already done that. They'll be first. But yeah, if you got any questions for the second half of the show, that's the way to send them. But I got a couple other things I want to talk to you about. Now, folks, today was a rough day for me because I have been trying to be positive and not be negative. But sometimes you just got to call them out, right? And that there have been people that asked me. So I confronted some of these right-wing Venezuelans today, and I confronted them. And I've done this before. I've argued with right-wing Venezuelans at the UN, etc. But today I did it a little bit differently. I didn't ask them questions. I didn't try to trap them. I just gave them a piece of my mind, and I filmed it. Why did I do that? Right? I've had people texting at me. Well, Caleb, tweeting at me, Caleb, you're not going to change their minds. I know I'm not going to change their minds. I'm doing this to put it on social media to make a statement. I'm doing this as an example because when you meet one of these people, you need to say the same thing to them. So yeah, today in the streets of New York City, there were a bunch of right-wing Venezuelans celebrating the overthrow, the kidnapping of their president, the fact that the USA looks like going to try and invade and overthrow their government. I confronted them on the streets of New York City. So here we go. This is a little bit of a more angry, negative tone than I usually like to take on. It's like 1 minute clip. This was my interaction, which is now, I guess it's, been retweeted like 400 times or whatever. Here we go. So yeah, get ready to see the angry side of Caleb.
You all should be ashamed of yourself. Your own people are going to be the next Iraqi refugees. Millions of your own people are going to die, and you're cheering for the death of your own people. You're cheering for the death of Americans like me are going to die. And they're cheering for the death of their own people. Shame on you. You're traitors to your country. You're traitors to your country. You're traitors. They're murderers, traitors to their country, celebrating the death of their own people. Millions of people are going to die. Venezuelans are going to die. Shame on you. Shame on you. Shame on you. War, you're cheering for the death of Americans. Americans like me are going to die on the streets of Venezuela. Shame on you. I don't want Americans like me to die so the bankers can get rich. Shame on you.
Yeah, and it's true. If Trump is actually serious about trying to overthrow the Venezuelan government, a lot of Americans are going to die. A lot of Americans are going to die because there are Bolivarian militias on every corner. And there are people locked and loaded who are ready to die for the Bolivarian revolution. And they are ready to fight, and they are ready to die for Venezuela. And that's why they kidnapped the leader, because they're hoping to try and weaken that. And this is another point that I want you all to understand. I'd really like you all to understand, right? In psychology, right? Freudian psychoanalysis, right? What are the basic concepts of Freudian psychoanalysis? Sigmund Freud, right? Sigmund Freud is one of those thinkers that, he really, it's not fair the way we think about Sigmund Freud, right? Because, Sigmund Freud believed a lot of crazy things, but there's a lot of things that he believed that no one gives him credit for, that we take for granted now. For example, talk therapy. That's just standard. Who invented talk therapy? Sigmund Freud, right? The idea of a subconscious. Who invented the concept of a subconscious? Sigmund Freud. The idea that you repress memory. Sometimes you choose not to remember things because they might be too painful. That's Sigmund Freud, right? The idea that some of your true feelings come across in dreams. That's Sigmund Freud, right? We don't give him credit for that. We just give him credit for the very extreme interpretations of some of his theories. And so we think of Sigmund Freud and we think of penis envy or whatever, and we think, oh, that was a crazy man. Well, yeah, he said that, but the stuff that he said, there's other stuff that he said that everyone just thinks is common sense now, but no one said it till Sigmund Freud came along. So what did Sigmund Freud preach? What did he teach? He said that your brain has three parts. Your id, which is your bodily desires, your just basic bodily desires. Your conscious mind, your thoughts, that's called your ego. But then in addition to your id and in addition to your ego, you have a third part, a higher part of your mind, which is your superego, right? That's your conscience. It's the voice of a parent. It's the voice of a religious leader or a teacher or someone you look up to. And your superego is the part of your mind that is always demanding that you do better. And the superego, Sigmund Freud, in his very liberal worldview, the superego, it is the source of a lot of guilt because it's never satisfied. It's always saying you can do better. It's always demanding that you do better. And the superego is pushing you to do your best, saying that you could do better, scolding you when you don't live up to your own accomplishments. Your superego is part of your mind. Now, why is your superego important? Well, your superego is what challenges you. Your superego is what pushes you to do better. Your superego is what says you could do better than this. We expect better of you. I want you to keep going. I want you to do a better job. That it's an important part of your mind. And a big part of Western liberal culture is killing the superego. That's a huge part of Western liberal culture. And that's what my book, Khrushchevism, is about. If you want to know what my book, Khrushchevism, A Study in Psychological Warfare, that I wrote, that's what it's about, is that they have realized that if you are going to be a strong person who goes out and does heroic things, you need to have a superego. You need to have a part of you that is demanding that you do better, that is pushing you to do better, that is demanding that you give it your all. And Sigmund Freud mocks the superego. And in fact, he goes after the ultimate superego, which is God, right? And he talks about the golden rule, love your neighbor as yourself. And he says you can't. It's not possible. You can't literally be in someone else's body. You cannot love your neighbor as yourself. Well, yeah, but the world tends to be a bit of a better place when we try now, doesn't it? But Sigmund Freud says you can never love your neighbor as yourself. So this is just going to lead to endless guilt, right? You can never actually be in your neighbor's shoes. You're always going to, at least to some degree or other, put your own self-interest first. So your superego is just going to lead to a bunch of guilt. And so a big part of modern psychology and modern liberal thinking is the idea we need to kill the superego. Kill the superego. Don't believe in God because, you'll never be good enough for God, right? So you're just going to feel guilty all the time. So get rid of your superego, right? And, right, we cannot have cult of personality, right? And that's what Khrushchev's attack on Stalin was. Stalin had a cult of personality, right? Stalin, God forbid that it's true. During the Second World War, Stalin was the voice on the radio leading the Soviet people to repel the Nazi invaders. Stalin became the symbol of their national rejuvenation and their 5-year economic plans to build up the economy. Stalin was the superego of the Soviet people. You can't have superego. Khrushchev accused him of cult of personality. And, and then we're told now that superego, cult of personality, admiring and looking up to a leader, that's bad. And it doesn't just apply to countries, right? It's not just, Stalin and Mao and Maduro. No. It also applies to political movements. You can't have a Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's a cult, right? You can't have a Malcolm X. It's a cult. It's brainwashing. They're worshiping the leader. You can't have strong, powerful leaders. They're just in it for themselves. It's all a grift. This is the game that they're playing. And it's not about Malcolm X, and it's not about Martin Luther King Jr. It's not about Maduro. It's not about Stalin. It's about you. The war on the superego, it's not about hurting Maduro. It's not about hurting Stalin. It's not about hurting Malcolm X or Martin Luther King Jr. It's about you, because they know you will be weak unless you have a superego, unless you have a part of your mind that is demanding the impossible from you and is challenging you to do what is right and to do what the best you can and to go out and be heroic and make great sacrifices. Unless you have a part of your mind, a voice in your head that is challenging you, a voice in your head that will never be satisfied, that it will always demand more from you, you will be a weak person. And it's true, right? That the main source of strength in the human spirit is having a superego. And that's why they want you to believe that there's no God. And that's why they want you to believe that any mass political movement is a cult. That's why they want you to believe that any great political leader is an authoritarian demagogue practicing cult of personality. And it's not because they want to hurt that leader. It's because they want to hurt you. They want to hurt you. And that's what they're doing. And Maduro is the superego of the Venezuelan people. And he has led them through hell and high water since 2015 when I was there. And he's led them through hell and high water. And the Venezuelan people have pulled together to resist an imposed food crisis and starvation, to resist, coup attempts, to resist everything. And so now the Trump administration is trying to remove the superego at the center of one of the most effective, brilliant mass movements that we've seen, the Bolivarian movement. They're trying to remove the superego, to weaken the Venezuelan people, to demoralize the Venezuelan people so they won't have the spiritual power to stand and resist this attack. This is Khrushchevism at its finest. That's what we're witnessing right now. They didn't invade the country. They knew they couldn't do that, and if they may try, but they'll be fighting them on every corner, and they'll be on the rooftops with their sniper rifles, and they'll be throwing Molotov cocktails. They've got that country locked and loaded. They can try, right? Trump thinks he's going to control them until they get a new leader. You know, a lot of Americans are going to come home dead, and that's a crime, and that's an outrage. Do not, if you're a longtime leftist, do not celebrate the death of American servicemen. That is something you should never do, right? It is a crime that anybody from Ohio or Pennsylvania or Texas or Louisiana should die for the international bankers so they can sink their fangs back into Venezuela. There's absolutely no reason that our American people, American boys and American girls, American working people from poor and working class neighborhoods in America should get shot down on the streets of Venezuela. We should have a government that does what Hugo Chavez does. Send the military to pave the roads of this country. Send the military to rebuild the bridges so we don't have bridges collapsing. Send the military to rebuild the power plants, to build new power plants. Send the military to build new highways and high-speed railway through this country, right? I do not celebrate the death of American servicemen, right? We can absolutely be not happy about what they're being sent to do, but it's not something to celebrate when American servicemen die. It's an outrage because they didn't join the military to kill Venezuelans. They didn't join the military to kill Afghans or kill Yemenis. They joined the military because they love their country and often out of economic necessity. And we need to have a government in this country that uses them to love this country, not to make war on other countries. And that we need to change the way we talk about a lot of things. And I'm going to get to that here in a minute. Because we're just getting started here tonight. I got plenty to say. As much as I've been go all day, I've also been caffeinating all day. So I've got plenty to say. I've got plenty to say about it, right? I've got plenty to say tonight. But folks, look, I made another video today. And I'm not going to show that video. I'm just going to reiterate what I said. And I'm actually shocked how many retweets this other video got. I was out in front of the federal courthouse, and I spoke my mind. And I spoke my mind about the failure of the anti-war movement, right? And this is what gets me in trouble. This is honestly why I'm so hated, I guess you could say, in communist circles. It's because I was doing communist stuff my entire adult life. I don't even call myself a communist anymore. I'm an innovationist. At this point, what I believe is so contrary to what they believe that I might as well just call it something new. But I was a member of the Workers' World Party for 8 years. I was around a Maoist group before that. And then, I've been doing communist stuff my whole adult life. And I'm telling you right now, this war would not have happened if we had a real anti-imperialist movement in this country. And some people even said to me, they said, Caleb, why are you blaming PSL for this? Why are you blaming PSL for this? I'll tell you, I am blaming PSL for this. Yes, I am blaming PSL for this. Why? Because there is an anti-war majority in this country. The majority of Americans do not want America to invade Venezuela, do not want Americans involved in the war. But yet, the anti-war movement is tiny. There were less than 300 people in Times Square today when I went to cover the rallies. What sense does that make? Why is it that public opinion is 75% against the war in Venezuela, but the protests against the war in Venezuela are smaller than ever? Why is that? It's because every Venezuela rally that happens has a bunch of stop Trump liberal pandering stapled onto it. Show me one hands-off Venezuela rally that wasn't run by CPI that doesn't have stop Trump derangement syndrome bullshit stapled to it. Show me one. Show me one single rally that is just against bombing Venezuela, right? Every time PSL went out into the streets, it was stop ICE, troops out of our cities, impeach Trump for being a big fat racist, and hands off Venezuela, right? Every rally they had was about transgender bathrooms and sex workers and critical race theory in school and hands off Venezuela. Why? Why would you do that? Especially when the most important constituency in America right now are people who loudly oppose this war. Candace Owens opposes this war. And she was a Trump supporter. She's a conservative, but she opposes this. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was the MAGA Republican, who was censured as soon as she took office, stripped of any committee roles, she opposes the bombing of Venezuela. Tucker Carlson opposes the bombing of Venezuela. Marjorie Taylor Greene opposes it. Thomas Massie opposes it. You go down the line. There's a whole lot of conservatives that oppose it. And if you look at the polls, it's even bigger. A very large percentage of Trump supporters don't want us involved in this. When Trump said America first, that meant not meddling in other countries. But I don't see any of those people at the rallies. Not a single one. They're not welcome. And they do everything they can to make sure those people will never join this movement. And that's why they put transgender bathrooms and ICE and troops out of our cities. And Donald Trump is a big fat racist and critical race theory and white skin. They put all this stuff attached to it because they don't actually want to stop the war, because it's a grift. It's a hustle. And I'll tell you how I know it's a hustle. In 2023, there was an amazing anti-war rally in Washington, D.C. called Rage Against the War Machine. It was an amazing rally. CPI was very proud to sponsor it. And Chris Hedges spoke at it. He's a leftist. And Dennis Kucinich spoke at it, Democrat, leftist. And Max Blumenthal, leftist, he spoke at it. But Tulsi Gabbard, our current CIA director, our intelligence director, she spoke at it. And, and Judge Napolitano, lifelong Republican, Fox News, he spoke at it. And it was mixed. It was conservatives. Ron Paul spoke at it. And it was a mixed rally. So what did PSL do? Well, if PSL really wanted to stop the wars, they would have said, wow, this is the biggest anti-war coalition we've ever had. Sign us up. Is that what PSL said? No. You'd think, well, if PSL, maybe that's Caleb, they just didn't agree with some of the people there. Fine. So PSL could have said, you know what? We don't agree with this rally. We're going to sit this one out, but that's fine. Is that what PSL did? No. If you looked at social media before the Rage Against the War Machine rally, they blasted all over social media that Rage Against the War Machine, the most broad, inclusive anti-war rally in recent U.S. history, the biggest anti-war rally since the Obama years, was a white supremacist gathering. They called them Nazis. And you saw what happened after the murder of Charlie Kirk. That was a call for murder. PSL wanted every single person at Rage Against the War Machine to be murdered. That's what they called for. When they called it a white supremacist rally, when Melinda Butterfield wrote in Struggle La Lucha that it was a white supremacist gathering, they called this rally that Garland Nixon spoke at, that Cynthia McKinney spoke at, they called it a white supremacist rally, which is they basically wanted to shoot everyone at Rage Against the War Machine in the neck. That's what Brian Becker wanted to do. That's what Sarah Flounders wanted to do. That's what Joe Lombardo wanted to do. It wasn't enough. They couldn't possibly endorse it. That would be crazy. They couldn't just sit it out because there were, God forbid, there were Republicans there. They called a rally that had Cynthia McKinney and Garland Nixon and Judge Napolitano and Ron Paul, and they called it a white supremacist rally. They used language to describe it. They basically made it sound like they were going to gather in Washington, D.C. and burn crosses and lynch black people. That's how evil PSL is. They basically were telling all their supporters, if the government rounds up all these people and arrests them, it's okay because they're right wing. That's what they were saying. Meanwhile, it actually happened. They did. The FBI raided the Uhuru movement. Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party were arrested and charged with being Russian agents. And what happened? Nothing. Nothing. Right? All the socialists, all the communists, all these groups, you'd think it was common sense. The American government arrests a group of black activists, a black socialist group led by a former Black Panther, an 85-year-old former Black Panther, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. They arrest him. They charge him with being a Russian agent. You would think every communist, socialist, leftist in the world would be out there. But did they do anything for them? No. PSL even tried to get their permit pulled. They have their annual Black is Back march in Washington, D.C. PSL actually tried to prevent them from having rallies in Washington, D.C. after they were raided by the FBI. And all kinds of nasty rumors were spread on the internet. They tried to say they were the same as this other group called Black Hammer. And there was all this social media stuff. And, oh, it's a cult, right? That they love that word cult, don't they? The liberals love that, right? Khrushchev called Stalin a cult of personality. I get accused of being a cult. CPI is in a cult. We're all cults, cult. They love that, right? You should be an individual, right? Don't have a super ego. Don't believe in any cause. Don't make any sacrifices, because then you're in a cult, right? The party of scumbag liberals. They declared all-out war on the Rage Against the War Machine rally. And so, instead of there being a big coalition that came out of that, of Republicans and Democrats together against war, now, as a result, we have a tiny little communist club that gathered in Times Square. And that makes me angry. I'm sorry. I apologize for getting fired up. But to see them stab Uhuru in the back and not do anything about it. I was in front of the federal courthouse in Tampa, Florida, on the day their trial opened, on the day of their sentencing. We had UN press conferences about it. Where the hell was Brian Becker? Where was Joe Sims of the Communist Party? Where was Bob Avakian? Where were any of them? Caleb from CPI, which is not a huge group, right? We're not huge. We're bigger than some of these groups are, but we're not huge. We were there, right? We are open about the fact we don't agree. We have political differences with the Uhuru movement. We were there. We were there in front of the federal courthouse. Jill Stein was there. Scott Ritter was there. Tucker Carlson highlighted them on his show. He's a Republican. But the left completely abandoned the Uhuru movement because they're not cool. They're not part of the club, right? They're not part of the club, right? They're not part of Brian Becker's cool protest club, right? And they declared war against Rage Against the War Machine. And they basically tried to incite violence and government repression against the Rage Against the War Machine rally. At a rally where leftists and conservatives were speaking together, they called it a Nazi rally. They basically wanted everyone there to be shot in the neck like Charlie Kirk. We saw what happened to Charlie Kirk. He got shot in the neck and they all said, woo, yeah, political violence. He's right wing. He deserved to die. And then you have to remember the words they used for Charlie Kirk, white supremacist, that's what they called the Rage Against the War Machine rally. So that's what they were doing. Don't you doubt it, right? When PSL members called the Rage Against the War Machine rally a white supremacist rally, when Melinda Butterfield wrote in Struggle La Lucha that the Rage Against the War Machine rally was a white supremacist gathering, that's what they wanted to happen. They were hoping that some nut or some government operative would get on the roofs and just open fire and kill everyone there because you're a Nazi. This is nuts. And these groups are evil. I am telling you, these groups are evil. As much as I disagree with them, I don't want them to die. Okay? I might disagree with them. I might want them to not have a monopoly over anti-war speech. I might want them to, treat people better. I might even want them sometimes even get angry at them and want them to suffer consequences. But I don't want them to die. I don't advocate violence against PSL. I don't advocate violence against Workers' World. I don't wish them any harm. I wish they would stop ruining American politics. And I wish they would actually allow a real anti-war movement to happen. But I don't wish them any harm. But that's their line. If you supported Trump, if you went to Rage Against the War Machine, you are a Nazi. And don't think it's just a slur. I have been attacked and confronted at these rallies. I have many times tried to do my job as a journalist and had these people follow me around. We know who you are, Caleb. You're a Nazi. You're a white supremacist. I went to a rally for Palestine 2 years ago. And there was a group of these thugs, these woke thugs in masks following me around. And I said, I'm on your side. I am on your side. I am with the Palestinians. And one of the thugs that was harassing me and my cameraman said, quote, that's just because of Russian imperialist bullshit. And I heard that and I'm like, okay, so most of the media is calling the Palestine protesters anti-Semitic. I'm the one TV network that agrees with you, that is giving you a platform, and you're following me around and harassing me because you think that I'm doing it for the wrong reasons. These people are garbage. The people who run the communist groups are criminals. They're criminals. And the reason they're acting so desperate and the reason they've targeted me so desperately is because their grift is coming to an end. The conditions in this country, in terms of public opinion, in terms of the economy, etc., are getting to the point that we should have a real movement against imperialism. And they are the phonies, the controlled opposition, the frauds. They're there to, they're there so that when America is trying to recruit Cubans and North Koreans and Chinese to be their agents, they say, look, we have communists in America. They would never allow open capitalists in your country. See, look, America is such a free, open society. We even let Joe Sims have his office there. That's why they're there. That's why you go to Harvard University. For years, Harvard University, there was a Revolution Books right near there. You got the Center for Marxist Education, Communist Party USA. They put them right there at Harvard because students from all over the world go to Harvard. Students from all over the world go to Harvard. And they take those Chinese students and those Vietnamese students and those Cuban students around and those students from South America. And they say, we're a free and open society. Look, we got ourselves a communist bookstore right there. Yeah, that's the only reason these groups exist. And they're all infiltrated heavily by the FBI. And they use them to prevent a real movement from emerging. And that's why they have the most inarticulate leaders, find me, ask Joe Sims to explain any basic Marxist concept, go ask Joe Sims to explain Lenin's concept of imperialism, explain anything. These people are placeholders. They're placeholders. They serve a foreign policy, propaganda, and intelligence purpose. And at this point, the conditions in America are bad enough that it's obvious we're going to need a real movement. And they're going to be out of a job pretty soon. And they know it. They know that their scam is coming to an end, right? And they know that. And that's why they're getting so desperate and vicious. And that's why they have targeted me the way they have. And that's why I'm going to call them out. Look, if Marjorie Taylor Greene, imagine for one moment that today's rally in New York City had Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson as the main speakers. You think there would have been just 300 people there? No, there would have been 5,000 people. There would have been 20,000 people. Imagine that Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene were speaking in Times Square about hands off Venezuela alongside Chris Hedges, alongside Dennis Kucinich. Imagine that. But that's not what happened. Because Brian got the permit. And they're racist. They're a bunch of racists. They don't even believe in transgender bathrooms. I bet they don't even start their speeches with their pronouns, right? These people are unbelievable. These people are unbelievable. And if we had a real movement like Rage Against the War Machine, was a real anti-war movement, a broad movement, this war would never have happened. Dissident MAGA, the people that voted for Trump but hate and can't stand his foreign policy. Dissident MAGA is the most important movement in America right now. It is the most important movement, right? The left, whatever, right? The left, whatever, right? But dissident MAGA, they are the most important political movement in America right now because they are people that are populists, that are opposed to the deep state, that are opposed to the banks. And then Trump got in and proved that he's going along with their foreign policy agenda. And they had the courage and the free thinkingness to say this is wrong. They are the most important people. The Tucker Carlson fans, the Marjorie Taylor Greene fans, the Candace Owen fans. They are the most important. And I don't include Nick Fuentes on that, by the way. Nick Fuentes supports this. You'll notice that. Nick Fuentes is supposed to be a big opponent of war and stuff like that. Nick Fuentes is cheering for this criminal action by Trump. Funny, he's supposed to be so anti-Israel or whatever. One of the main countries that has been supporting the Palestinians, a key part of the anti-imperialism, etc., he supports regime change against them. So, Nick Fuentes revealed himself today. So, yeah, I'm going to call out the misleadership, the fake leaders of the anti-war movement. And I apologize for getting shrill. And I know it's a little bit of a bummer. And I know people are confused by it. But I take this seriously. That is my curse. I take this seriously. I can't half-ass this. That's what you're supposed to do. If you want to be a famous influencer, half-ass this. Just say a bunch of stuff that a bunch of people agree with and get yourself retweeted, right? I kind of did that today. I said what anyone supporting Venezuela would say to those people that were celebrating the attack, and I got it retweeted. But I don't half-ass it. I actually want to win. I actually want us to win, and because I actually want us to win, and I actually want us to make a difference, I am not able to half-ass it. So I will say I blame PSL for this, right? If they had embraced the rage against the war machine, if they had not engaged in a vicious campaign of slander against the rage against the war machine, if they were not keeping the anti-war movement isolated from the anti-war majority, this would never have happened. If they had highlighted the anti-war voices on the right, if they were serious about actually stopping the war, not just building a woke counter gang, if they look, I'll tell you one thing. It's a little bit sad. This doesn't apply to PSL, but it applies to the Communist Party, applies to the Workers' World Party. Those groups have done more fighting me, a guy on the internet who runs the Center for Political Innovation, than they have supporting Venezuela. I am not exaggerating. That sounds crazy. I know it sounds egotistical. It sounds crazy. They have done more to oppose me than to support Venezuela, right? You can't make that up. It sounds egotistical, but ask them. Ask anyone who's been in the Communist Party over the last couple of years. Look at how many articles on the Communist Party USA website are there about Venezuela? Well, there's a big, long one about me and about how bad I am for being the wrong kind of communist, and he's actually a Nazi, you know. So, I mean, it's particularly crazy. PSL, not exactly, you know, but you know, I'm just telling you. So, I mean, there's a reason to be angry at these people. There's a reason to be angry at these people, okay? Now, I observed some other things today. One thing that I observed, which honestly, I will be honest here, I have mixed feelings about this, and I'll just tell you, right? So there's a dude in New York City, don't know his name, he always has his face covered up, and I don't know, he's just an anti-Semite. I don't know what you want to say about him. And he's been around for decades. Right. And I remember one year he came to May 1st when I was a member of the Workers' World Party. We had a May 1st demonstration. This guy showed up at the May 1st demonstration with a huge sign that said 80% of billionaires are Jews. And we kicked him out. We actually had a little bit of a scuffle. We removed him. And this guy just goes around with signs against Jews. Right. And he just does that. Right. And it's like his shtick as he shows up at leftist rallies with big anti-Semitic signs. The leftists all kick him out, whatever. So today I was in Times Square, and there was about 300-400 people there. He showed up, had a big sign. It said, "The USA is controlled by Israel." And nobody said anything. And he just stood there, and he was just part of the rally. And he's not wrong. I mean, Israel has very, very, very exponential, disproportionate control over U.S. foreign policy. I don't even disagree with that sign so much. That guy who's basically an American professional anti-Semite, he showed up at the communist rally with his big sign, "Israel controls the USA." Nobody touched him. And honestly, on the one hand, I think it's good that we're not being violent toward people we disagree with. But on the other hand, that's not the whole story. The problem isn't an ethnic group. The problem isn't a religion. The problem is an economic system, globalism, imperialism. And that guy saying that, I mean, again, he's not wrong that Israel has a huge amount of power. And I have come around on that. I used to be one of these people who insisted, oh, no, it's just imperialism. Zionism is just a tool of imperialism. No, it's complicated. But that said, the problem is economic. At its root, the problem is not ethnic. The problem is not religious. And if you just go around blaming, you think there wouldn't be imperialism if Israel just didn't exist? No. I mean, Israel is an integral part of imperialism, and Israel is pretty, but it's not. The problem is economic. And if you're just going to talk about one ethnic group and point the finger at them, you're not solving the problem. Right. And that's when people start talking about anti-Semitism being socialism for fools. Right. Because it's like it's in the place of understanding economics and the tendency of the falling rate of profit and value crisis and the ultra monopolies and export of capital. And it's just like, oh, it's the Jews, and look, Nick Fuentes, the guy who's made his career pushing that line. It's the Jews. He supports attacking Venezuela. Why not? Right. I mean, why wouldn't he, right? Because he doesn't care. He's not opposing imperialism. He's not interested in development and the struggle for economics. He just doesn't like Jews. So, I mean, the leader of a sovereign country in Latin America being forcibly kidnapped, and the USA looking like we're about to have a war with a Latin American country. I mean, he just doesn't like Jews, right? So that, bigotry of any kind, right? Bigotry of any kind, stupid racial tribal thinking is not okay, right? And it's weird because people might say I talk out of both sides of my mouth. I don't. There is an ultra sensitivity and a crypto Zionism among a lot of leftists on the one hand, but there's also just dumb bigotry. Nick Fuentes is a dumb bigot. He's a dumb bigot. Okay. He's a dumb bigot. And I mean, his politics he's racist, and he actually sounds a lot like an Israeli, right? Candace Owens, she's very, very interested in the role of the Israel lobby, etc. But she opposes this because she understands this is about globalism and imperialism, and she's not a leftist, but she, is a traditional Catholic, and she understands that attacking Venezuela is about serving the same system that she opposes, that is getting rid of traditional values, usury, etc. She has her own worldview that is not mine. She opposes this. Tucker Carlson, also a conservative, Presbyterian, traditional, guy, conservative. He opposes this, right? He says, America first. Why are we doing this? Regime change, not good, right? He opposes this. Marjorie Taylor Greene opposes this, right? Thomas Massey opposes this. Libertarian opposes this. But Nick Fuentes is just a racist. And so why would he oppose this? He just hates different ethnic groups. And in fact, his whole ideology is basically that we should set up another Israel, right? He believes that, Zionism is the belief that Jews are so special and so persecuted and they'll never fit in with other people. They need to carve out a territory and have a Jewish state, right? That's Zionism, the struggle to create a Jewish state. What does Nick Fuentes believe as a white supremacist? He believes that whites are just so special and better than everybody else, so we need to find a section of America and carve it out for whites only. That's Israel. He basically wants to create Israel for white people. That's his belief system, right? Right there, I'm not shocked that Nick Fuentes supports this because Nick Fuentes' politics he's a racist. There are other people on the right that are deep thinkers. Nick Fuentes is not one of them. And I have been saying over and over again that dissident MAGA are the most important constituency in America right now. However, I do not include Nick Fuentes in that. Nick Fuentes is awful and he is not helpful. And you'll see he's not dissident MAGA. He's cheering for Trump on this one. Got a few other things to say. About this. I mean, this is a tough time, but I actually wanted to say this, right? Center for Political Innovation, we have our own unique ideology called innovationism. And it's our own perspective, right? But we can look with inspiration to other leaders. And one person that I look to with great admiration is Chairman Omali Yeshitela. And he gave a brilliant message today about the attack on Venezuela, what it means. And he ended the message with this bit of wisdom. And this is what I'd like us all to keep in mind. And trust me, I'm talking about myself too. I'm not just telling you this. I'm not being a hypocrite because this applies to me as well. But this is how he ended his brilliant webcast today about what needs to be done.
This relationship that we have with the colonizer, you can assume that this is permanent. That is never going to change. And the only thing the most you can do is protest how it treats you. That's nothing. So in this instance, the movement is everything and the revolution is nothing. We say that instead of protesting the world as it is, we have to be let me put this a different way. Instead of only protesting the world as it is, we have to be involved in building the world that we want. And that's what it is that we're doing the African People's Social Party. And that's what we're saying to people here today. We shouldn't be taken off task with just protest. We have to double down and build the African People's Socialist Party. We have to double down and build the economic development programs that negates the power of the colonizer in our own community. If we have our own capacity to feed, clothe, and house ourselves, it impacts on all of the industries that make themselves rich off of having crippled us and our capacity to do that. The whole social system requires the appearance of dependency of African people.
What is he saying there? And that was something I thought about. At first today, you know, I thought, oh my God, you know, we're about to have our big event in New Jersey. Are we going to be able to have it? I mean, people are going to be so demoralized, they won't be able to come. That's what I was thinking. But then I heard Chairman O'Malley, and I realized, no, I mean, the only way this is going to stop is if we have a real anti-imperialist movement. And so we have to build that movement, not just complain about the way the world is, not just oppose this outrage, but build the movement. That's what we have to do. We have to build the movement. And there's no substitute for that. We have to build the movement. And that means having big events where we connect with each other and where there are people that we may disagree with, but we focus on what we agree on. We have to build the movement. And what we do with CPI is we're building a movement. And we can't get distracted. Yes, we should protest against this, and there will be protests, but we have to just build. We have to build our community. We have to teach innovationism. We have to have our big event in New Jersey a week from tomorrow. We have to give out the awards we're giving to great anti-imperialists. I'm so excited for the great anti-imperialists who are going to be there. We have to talk about different cases. We have to hear from Garland Nixon. We have to, you know, we have to hear from the World Youth Festival organizer. We have to hear from people who are working for the freedom of Haq Jahan. We have to hear from the people we're awarding. We have to preach our own ideas. We have to build our community. We have to come together. And we have to do it. That's what we got to do. We got to build our community. And even though we're angry and outraged about what's happened, we have to focus on the positive, right? We have to focus on what we can accomplish together. We have to keep our eyes on the prize. And it's going to be difficult because this is painful. This is awful. I'm going to be out in front of the federal court on Monday covering Maduro and his wife being dragged into federal court. I mean, this is awful. This is absolutely awful. This is a complete attack on the Venezuelan people. This is awful, but we're still going to have to organize. We're going to have to build. We've got to focus on the community building. We've got to just have a successful event in New Jersey. So I hope that you'll join us in New Jersey. It's going to be a great event. It's actually filling up. So, if too many more people sign up, it might actually be a little bit of a problem, but we're good right now. You can still come. There's still time, right? And, I don't know. It ain't over till it's over, as they say. But, we got vans. We're bringing people in, and it's going to be a lot more people than I planned for. I'll tell you that much. And I'm very, very excited. I'm very, very, very excited about it. So I hope that you will come. I hope that you'll register. I want to just address a couple more points, a couple more things. First of all, I just to get this out there, whenever I make this complaint, whenever I start talking about PSL and their misleadership, and I start making this point, the response, like clockwork, that always comes out is, well, you don't do anything. Look at our end of the year message. CPI does a lot. We disrupted the October 8th No Kings rallies saying hands off Venezuela. Our members were on television in Los Angeles saying hands off Venezuela. We have done more for Venezuela. We have a record. We have an article we published called "We Are Venezuela's Real Friends" that just goes over all that we have done for Venezuela, supporting Alex Saab. We were even mentioned in a Maduro speech at one point. CPI was, right? You can read about it. So anyone who tries to tell you that we don't do anything for Venezuela, I mean, they're just, and these people, a lot of times, especially on the internet, when people are shit talking, They're talking to themselves. They're not even talking to you, right? Read this article. We are Venezuela's real friends. We have done, our record of solidarity with Venezuela is massive, right? You can read this article on the CPI website. We have, if there's anybody who's walked the walk for Venezuela, it is the Center for Political Innovation. Today, in the rain, in the cold in Minneapolis, our member Penny was in the streets shouting by herself, hands off Venezuela, hands off Maduro, right? I'll probably put the video of that on later, right? Our members in LA were in the streets today. I mean, go read this article. We are Venezuela's real friends. You'll see a timeline that's really long of all the activism. I've been to Venezuela. I gave lectures at universities. We have a book about Venezuela. This is my writings on Venezuela. The siege has failed. Why Venezuela stands strong against globalism, imperialism, right? We have done massive work. So anytime I call out PSL for their opportunism and their smear campaigns and their castration of the anti-war movement, every time I do that, they're responsible. You don't do anything. Actually, we do. And there's well-documented proof of that, right? There are people right now, I kid you not, it's like we've done the real work, right? We have done the real work of supporting Venezuela. We disrupted the No Kings rallies. We had outreach campaigns. You just read the article. We have done so much. Like, I've lectured at universities about Venezuela. We published books about Venezuela. We have done so much. Yet, there are people that are misreading one of my tweets and claiming that I said there was no threat to Venezuela, which I didn't say, right? I didn't say that, right? They've got one tweet that I made, and they're saying, well, Caleb said that there was no threat to Venezuela. I didn't say that. If I thought there was no threat to Venezuela, why were our people disrupting the No Kings rallies? If I said there was no threat to Venezuela, why were we publishing books? Why were our members on TV in LA saying hands off Venezuela? Our members have been out in the streets in LA like every weekend saying hands off Venezuela. So yeah, people who are saying that are just lying to you. And what I was saying in the tweet was Trump said, I have ordered the CIA to overthrow the Venezuelan government. And I said, the CIA has been trying to do that since 1999. That's all I said. And that is a fact, right? And I was annoyed by Trump saying that because Trump, was making it sound like they just now decided they wanted to do that, as if they haven't been doing that since 1999. So that's just the one thing I just wanted to get out there. Anyone who tries to tell you that we haven't done anything for Venezuela is lying. And they always say that, right? And that is that's part of PSL. That's part of their shtick, right? Whenever they want to avoid any criticism, if you ever criticize PSL, their response is, yeah, well, you don't do anything. But yeah, we do. The thing is, though, what they do is problematic and doesn't help. They don't want to have that conversation. So they suppress it. Well, at least we're doing something, Well, hey, we could all just jump around in a circle all day. We'd be doing something. Hey, we could all go shit on a public street and we'd be doing something. We could go to the art museum and pee on a great work of art and we'd be doing something, right? The question is, what are you doing and is it helping? Right? PSL doesn't want to have that conversation because what they are doing is helping Brian Becker grift money. That's what they're helping do. And they want to avoid obviously realizing that. So they say, well, we actually do something. Yeah. And what you're doing is preventing a real anti-war movement from emerging. What you're doing is gatekeeping. What you're doing is keeping anti-imperialism isolated. What they've been doing is they've been keeping the anti-war movement in America fringe, as in isolated from the masses of people, cringe, as in woke and, completely crazy, and cringe, fringe, and narrow. That's what they've been doing, right? Every Hands Off Venezuela rally has a bunch of woke stuff stapled onto it. Cringe, fringe, and woke. That's what they've been doing, right? All right, look at the rallies they have in Venezuela, right? And the young people are all out there in uniforms, marching, and they love their country. Right? They love their country. We can't do that in America. That's fascist, right? It's like in Venezuela, all the young people wear uniforms. They're proud of their country. But if you go to these rallies, it's all just a bunch of people with piercings, masks over their face, hunched over. It's like they do everything they can to just have the rally give off this unhealthy, angry, bitter, paranoid vibe. It's like they couldn't, look at the Black Panthers, the way they organized their rallies. They had all those young people in uniforms marching behind the black flag. Revolution has come. It's a totally different vibe, right? And they think that's fascist, right? You know, they want a grungy, cringy, angry, pessimistic, I mean, how many times on here have I shown you the art that they make in North Korea and how amazing it is, right? And that beautiful statue, the Senegal, the monument. This is the statue, right? That they built for the independence of Senegal. This is North Korea built this in the African country of Senegal to celebrate their independence, right? Look at that. That's amazing. If any PSL member, anyone in the Workers' World Party ever painted something like that, they'd be expelled. Oh, that makes me uncomfortable. That's heteronormative. You have a mom and a dad. Why isn't there a gay couple there? And that man is so muscular. That's, body erasing. That man should be fat and, and there's no piercings there. And they're just, I mean, it's like, look at this. This is the vibe that the real anti-imperialist movement around the world gives off. Hope, optimism. Look, the baby, the family, and the mother and the father and the baby is pointing towards the future. That's the kind of movement I want to build. That's why North Korea built that, right? It's a beautiful, beautiful work of art. That is socialist realism. The CIA messed that up and funded abstract art and all kinds of Jackson Pollock stuff, right? That makes you feel different, right? If you look at social realist art, you feel good. You feel proud, you feel hopeful, right? If you look at Jackson Pollock and the kind of art that PSL promotes and all of that, you feel ugly, you feel disorganized. And they talk about this openly. It's not a secret. They know that. And that's why they do it, right? And they think that making you feel hopeful and optimistic is fascist, right? No blue hair, I'm out, So I'm just telling you, right? There's a deeply spiritual issue here. There's a deeply spiritual issue here. It's much more beyond politics, right? It's, again, the death of the superego. They're Trotskyites, and Trotsky wanted permanent revolution. And Trotsky wanted, was all about the libido, was all about the Oedipus complex, kill your father. But they weren't all about the superego, and they weren't all about community and the ecstatic feelings of community, right? If you read Sigmund Freud, he talked about how many of his clients who were religious described a feeling of ecstatic community, right? A connection with the universe. And they said that one could be religious on the basis of that feeling alone, even if they were not an adherent of a particular faith. If you can have that kind of spiritual connection, that feeling of oneness, right? That connection, that is what it means to be religious. And Freud is just laughing at this. This is crazy. I never feel that ever. Well, that's what we should be striving to build, that state of transcendence where you feel connected to the universe. You feel connected with God, that higher power, right? The feeling that you're part of a movement and you're fighting for something that's right. That's what we should be striving to build in our movements. The feelings that come out of this painting, that's what we should be trying to build. Not grunge, not pessimism, not bitterness, not resentment. I want a movement that makes people feel like that. That's the kind of movement I want to make. I want to be part of. That's the kind of movement that we want to build. That's the kind of movement I want to build. And that's the kind of movement that you're not allowed to build, that these controlled opposition groups will never build. And that's why they hate the American flag. Oh my God, you can't wave the American flag. That's why they celebrate grossness and pessimism. That's why they're all bitter and they're all tearing each other down all day long. We're building something different. And when people meet CPI members, they say, you guys don't seem like communists. Right? I've had multiple people say, you guys don't seem like communists. You're not angry all the time. Well, I get angry. I've been angry on here. I was angrier earlier today. And that's why I have mixed feelings about this. I don't want to build an angry, negative movement. I really don't. I came back to my Christian faith when I was in Iran, when I was on the ship on my way to Yemen. And, it's a long story. I don't want to build a bitter, negative movement. I'm an anti-imperialist, but I want to build a movement that is pro-growth and pro-humanity. I want to build a movement that says there is no limit to human growth and human creativity. And we are a brilliant species that has godlike creativity, and we need to unleash the human creativity of every person. That's the kind of movement I want to build. I'm not interested in resentment. I am not interested in tearing other people down. I'm not interested in jealousy. I'm interested in unleashing human creativity and brilliance to soar to new heights. That's what I'm interested in. Anger will eat you alive. It will. Anyway, I also want to address this point, and then we'll do our roll call, and then I'll start answering people's questions. there's been people here today that said, well, Caleb, you supported Trump. And so somehow this is your fault. Well, I hate to break it to you folks, but you think I don't know that Trump murdered Qasem Soleimani in his first term? I knew that. You think I don't know that Trump did a lot of awful things in his first term? The reason that I said Trump was the lesser of two evils in the election is still valid, which is that during the election, Kamala Harris was saying, we will continue sending weapons to Ukraine. We will continue destabilizing countries. How dare Trump meet with Kim Jong-un? We need to spread human rights around the world. We need to censor disinformation and silence critical voices. And during the election, Donald Trump ran on the platform of, I will stop wars around the world. I'm going to end wars. I'm going to protect your free speech. Now, tell me, yes or no, if the American people had gone out in their millions and voted for a candidate that was saying that she was going to suppress free speech and silence dissidents, saying that she was going to escalate the war in Ukraine, and given a popular mandate to that, would that have been a good thing? No. Isn't it better that the American people voted in their millions for somebody who said he was going to end the wars, who said he was going to protect our free speech? He didn't do it, but isn't it better that people registered their vote against these wars? Isn't it better that people registered their votes in favor of free speech? I think it is. It's kind of a no-brainer. Right? Even though Trump didn't do what he said he was going to do, what he said he was going to do was way better than what his opponent said she was going to do. What his opponent said she was going to do is kind of what he's doing. Trump has suppressed free speech, pro-Palestine students, of people protesting ICE. Trump has expanded wars. He bombed Iran. He's now, attacked Venezuela. Yes, Trump is doing things that he said he would not do, and that sucks. But would it have been better if the American people voted in favor of all the bad things that Trump is doing? That's not the issue. I was not telling people that Trump would necessarily do all these things. I said it would be very difficult. It would rely on the only way, if you look at the letter we wrote to Donald Trump, I said the only way that Trump would be able to do the things he said he was going to do was if he built a mass movement. And Trump kind of had a mass movement behind him, a little bit of one, and he spit on them. And he just attacked Marjorie Taylor Greene. And Trump has spit in the face of all the people that wanted to build a mass movement that would have backed him up. So I think I was right. As much as Trump has been a huge disappointment, it's better that the American people voted for somebody who was promising to do good things and didn't do it than it would be for the American people to go out and vote for someone promising to do bad things. Right? I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? It's pretty obvious that yes, Trump has been a huge disappointment, but at least people voted for him promising to not do all these things. Kamala Harris said she was going to do all the bad things that Trump has done. Trump, on the other hand, said he wasn't going to do it. I think it's better when people vote for what is right, even if they don't get it, than if they vote for what is wrong and give a popular mandate to what is wrong. And I think that's a defensible position. Most of the people attacking me, attacking CPI and all of that, they're just, nonsense. Like, there's a bunch of bots in here that aren't even listening, we got to just stand strong and just organize and build. Right. And that's what our event coming up in New Jersey is about. Right. And we're organizing, we're having a great event, and we just have to build our community. Right. And not everyone is going to be on the same page at our event coming up. I'll just be honest with you. There's going to be people at this event, I think, based on some of the organizations we're working with, who don't necessarily agree with us on some things, but do agree with us on other things. And that's what coalitions are about. That's what coalitions are about. There's going to be somebody from the Green Party that we're giving an award to. I'm not a Green Party guy. There's going to be somebody from the Uhuru movement or from the Black is Back coalition we're giving an award to. They have a different perspective than us. There's going to be all kinds of different people there because we're building a real movement. Right? We're doing what Rage Against the War Machine was trying to do, actually build a real movement to actually win. So that's how these things work. So, all right. So folks, we'll do the roll call, and then I'll start answering people's questions. If you've got any questions for me to answer in the second half, I'll do that. A bunch of people have sent in questions over the last few days. Yeah. All right. So names and locations, names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Mariah in Wyoming. Good to see you. Good to see you. Jane in New Zealand. Good to see you. Good to see you. Ryan in Kansas City. Good to see you. Love the show. Hey, we love you too. Tennessee, Grandpa. Good to see you. St. David's, Bermuda. Hank in Kentucky. Good to see you. Rose with Maduro. Very good. Ottawa in Canada. Auckland, New Zealand. John in Florida. JT24 in Mississippi. Joel. Alex in Brazil. Names and locations. Names and locations. Dean in New Jersey. You coming to the event, Dean? You're going to be at the event? You're in New Jersey. You ought to be there. Don't miss it. Scott in Maryland. Robert in New Jersey. The Ozarks. I got family from those areas. California. Very good. Patch in Arizona. Oklahoma. Tim Harper. Good to see you, Tim. Good to see you. Good to see you. Matteo in Italy. Good to see you. Jenny in Cincinnati. Killian in Milwaukee. Good to see you, Killian. Brian in Ohio. Good to see you, Brian. Jacob in Wisconsin. Frank in Solingen, Germany. It's late over there. Master Jack in South Africa. It's late over there too, man. Briggy in PA. Woo, Briggy. Good to see you. Good to see you, Briggy. Good to see you. Good to see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? We got Marvin in New Jersey. Are you coming to the event, Marvin? You're in New Jersey. You really ought to come to the event. It's going to be good. It's going to be good. Link down in the description. Philip in Washington's 4th Congressional District. Very, very good. John McCarthy in Chicago. Beloved member, hardworking guy. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. David Fox in Australia. Daniel in Mexico. Good to see you, Daniel. JJ Galanis in Salt Lake City. Good to see you. JJ Galanis. JJ Galanis. All right. Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. Calling you out as I see you. Who is with us? Who is with us? Sweat is pouring down my face because I'm wearing multiple layers here. So I need to do something about the multiple layers that I am wearing. Maybe I can put on Penny's video. We might put Penny on later. Oh, good to see you, Kinkle. David Fox. I need to take off some of the layers that I'm wearing. I need to change clothes here momentarily. I'm not going to do that on the camera. It's not that kind of channel, but I need to put something on. So why don't I put on the German melody from Cornelius Cardew? These are some old German communist songs from the 1930s. It's a medley of 3 of them. I'll put that on, and then when I come back, we'll answer questions. And keep an eye out for the video from today of the Venezuela rallies. I've got that video. It'll be premiering tomorrow. And yeah. All right. So we're going to put some music on, then I'll come back and answer questions. So if you have any questions for the second half of the show, right, the best way to send them is buy me a coffee. Buy me a coffee / Caleb Maupin is the best way to send them. It is a great way to send them. So there you go. You can buy me a coffee. Great way to send them. You can also send Rumble rants on the Rumble, and you can also cash at me at Caleb Maupin 22. So send some questions. So now I'm going to put the music on while I change clothes and get some new water. And then after that, I will start answering questions. And then we'll put Penny's little outreach video that she did today, which was, I mean, it's very brave. I admire Penny. She goes out by herself. It's very hard to protest by yourself. It takes real strong character to do that. So I think it's really great that Penny went out by herself. The LA team was out in the streets. They did more TV interviews today. I was out in the streets today. You saw me confronting the Venezuelans. That was pretty cool. Yeah, so we're going to put on the music, and then I will start answering questions, and then I got to go to sleep. So there we go. Here we go.
Tailman, he was out in front, his fist was raised to strike them. Brigades were growing thick and fast to take the battle forward. The flag was red and the fight was on. For our sturdy comrade Tailman, raise your fist. Sound the alarm, the phony court has sentenced him to perish. But when the people of the world rise up to liberation, we'll snatch comrade tailman, raise your fist. Dimitrov was in justice, but the traitors thought they had him. But news was spread at lightning speed, and world opinion freed him. The world awakes, indignation flames, for our sturdy comrade tailman, raise your fist.
Spanish heaven spread their brilliant starlight high above our trenches in the plain. From the distance, morning comes to greet us, calling us to battle once again. Far off is our home, yet ready we stand. We're fighting and winning for you. Freedom! We'll not yield a foot to Franco's fascists, even though the bullets fall like sleet. To stand those peerless men are comrades, and for us there can be no retreat. Rome is our home, yet ready we stand. We're fighting and winning for you. Freedom! The drums, ready the bayonets, forward march, victory our reward. With a scarlet banner smash their columns, Taman battalion ready forward march. And just because he's human, a man would like a little bite to eat. He wants no rule and a lot of talk that gives no bread or meat. Selective to the work that must be done. But John in the workers united, for you are a worker too. And just because he's human, he doesn't like a pistol to his head. He wants no servants under him and no boss over his head. Selective to the work that must be done. For God in the workers united, for you are a worker too. And just because he's human, the job is all he is on. The liberation of the working class must be led by workers alone. Selective to the work that must be done. For God in the workers united, for you are a worker
All right, we're back. We're back. Thanks, everybody. And I want to take a minute to just calm down. All right. I started out this stream by breathing, and I really do want everybody, look, it's very tempting in times like this to just get negative and reactive, and we can't do that, right? And that's what I ended, my remarks tonight by pointing out we can't do that, right? We just got to do what Chairman O'Malley said. We got to build. We got to build. We got to build. The only way out of this is building. This wouldn't be happening if we had a real anti-imperialist movement. And the only way to stop this kind of thing from happening is to build a real anti-imperialist movement. So we have to build an anti-imperialist movement. That's all we have to do. I mean, Now is the time. You need to get involved in CPI. You need to come to our event in New Jersey. You need to help us do outreach. You need to get involved in a community. You need to learn to care for other people. Look, if you want to be happy in this life, there are two ways you can do it. One is to build, to construct, to create. And the second is to love, to connect with other people. And being in a movement is one way to do both of those things. In a movement, you build, you organize, you pull off operations, you construct. And in a movement, you work with comrades, brothers and sisters, and you build and you create. And that's what makes movements very special. And we need to build a movement. You know, Maduro would never have been the leader of Venezuela if it wasn't for a movement. He's a guy who comes out of movements. And we're not going to be able to stop this kind of thing until we have a movement. So now is the time to build a movement. And that's all there is to it. And I can get angry and wave my arms. And I did that tonight. And, you know, to some degree or other, that's necessary, right? I don't think we should necessarily feel guilty about getting fired up, about opportunism in our own ranks, or about the betrayal that we feel from Trump or from other forces. But, you know, at the end of the day, we got to build a movement. And that I am honest with you all. I really am thankful for the day in 2015 when I reconnected with God and with Jesus. Because if it hadn't been for that, for learning to let go and learning to feel that universal feeling of oneness that Sigmund Freud described, if it hadn't been for that, I don't know what I would have done, because I was in a very, very negative place. And, you know, and as much as Marxism as a movement is atheistic, look, I'm not a Marxist. I don't believe in dialectical materialism. I don't believe history is defined by struggle and confrontation. You know, and I don't believe that all that exists is matter. I do believe in spiritual forces, and that around the world, right, that dialectical side of Marxism that Trotsky used for the permanent revolution, that was part of the Cultural Revolution in China. I don't believe in that stuff, right? And that you look at socialist countries now, you get a much more optimistic vibe. Maduro believes in God. He's a Christian, right? The leader of the Russian Communist Party is a Russian Orthodox Christian, and that, you know, you have to be in this for something positive, and you have to connect, and you have to love. And you know, we get upset with the communist groups, but that's because they're, a lot of them, based in this very, very negative worldview. I do want to tell you one thing, right? And again, I don't know. One individual that I am really honored to have known was a guy named Andy Stapp. And I didn't know him in depth. I encountered him. I knew him a little bit. I was in the Workers' World Party. He was an elderly man who was in the Workers' World Party, and he died when I was in the Workers' World Party. And Andy Stapp was an individual who had he had formed a union in the U.S. Armed Forces during the Vietnam War, the American Servicemen's Union. He had formed, and you know, Andy was an anti-Vietnam War activist. He had a New York Times obituary. He was a very, you know, prominent individual in the anti-war movement, and he moved to North Korea. And for many years, he lived in North Korea, doing broadcasts over the DMZ, urging U.S. troops to defect and, you know, come over to North Korea. You know, and he was definitely a Marxist-Leninist. And that when he died, I remember at Andy's memorial, there were a lot of people that said, you know, Andy was pretty sad in the final years of his life because the world didn't seem to go the way he expected. You know, Andy, you know, the world in the 90s took a pretty dramatic turn away from the way he thought it was going to go. Andy was a hardline Marxist-Leninist communist. He'd lived in North Korea for years. He, you know, and he believed that, you know, that communism in the 20th century was going to win, and it didn't. And, you know, for years, I had the perspective of, oh, you know, just give it time, it'll rebound. But now I understand that there are reasons that communism didn't win in the 20th century. As much as the fall of the Soviet Union was a devastating event, as much as, you know, I don't celebrate, you know, those awful periods. I mean, the fall of the Soviet Union was just, I mean, it was, you know, a period of, I mean, in terms of just economic, you know, looting and destruction of Russia, and, you know, and neoliberalism, and it was awful. But there were things in the communist movement that needed to adjust, and the communist movement needed to be more like China. They needed markets. You needed to have a market sector to be part of it. You can't have the Stalin model of everything being run by the government. You need markets and businesses, but you need a planned economy. Profits shouldn't be in command. You need a popular state that is anti-imperialist, anti-colonial to manage the economy. But you gotta utilize the market and human creativity and individual initiative and entrepreneurship, and that also, you can't have that dialectical view, and that there were things in communism couldn't win in the 20th century because there were some pretty big problems with it, right? And that dialectical materialist worldview, it says everything's about struggle and confrontation, the belief that somehow owning a business is immoral, right? And that's a thing that a lot of communists believe, right? Even now, right? They think like, if you own a business, you're a bad person. You have employees at your business, you're a bad person because you're exploiting them. Like that's just not how these things work, right? That the problem with capitalism is that it's an irrational economic system, right? And what you need is you need a society where profits are not in command, and you need a state that represents the people and controls the economy to make sure there's growth and invests in communities, right? But it's not immoral to own a business. And, history, in order for history to advance, people have to own businesses, right? And then you look at socialism in China, it's a lot of people owning businesses. It's what makes it strong. Venezuela too, right? There's actually a higher rate of state ownership in China than there is in Venezuela. So we're not against people owning businesses. And, we're not saying that everything should be run by the government. We're not certainly not glorifying degrowth and saying that growth is bad. We need a rationally organized economy to unleash human creativity and growth. And this new synthesis we have developed of an anti-imperialist, optimistic, pro-growth, pro-humanity movement is called innovationism. You can go to our website on CPI USA and read what is innovationism. The text, the little pamphlet book we've written about what innovationism is. And that there are some key things that, for example, Marxism is largely a labor union, labor movement adjacent ideology. That's not going to work anymore. The resentment of the employer against the employee, you can't build a movement on the basis of that in our time because we live in a gig economy. And, Uber drivers compete with each other to get gigs. And an Uber driver feels that he works on the basis of his own innovation, and he doesn't have solidarity with other Uber drivers, occasionally they might share grievances against the company, but for the most part, in the gig economy, the idea, it's not like a factory where the factory workers get together and assert their interest against the boss. That's not going to be the basis. It's going to have to be a movement on behalf of all of society against the monopolies and their stagnative degrowth agenda, right? It's going to be a movement of all of society, an anti-monopoly state, an anti-monopoly coalition, as William Z. Foster wrote about, on behalf of all society in favor of economic growth. And that's the kind of movement that we need to build. And that's largely around the world. That's what anti-imperialist societies are about. I love how the trolls are just popping in here and they have no idea what we're even talking about. They're just popping in here. It's like they're bots. It's like I look at the chat. I don't even see all the comments because I'm on StreamYard. And it's like I see them come in and it's like just random Trumpers just come in and say stuff. And I'm glad it's getting us a lot of traffic, right? It's getting us a lot of traffic, but there you go. But anyway, the Center for Political Innovation, we're building a unique, new, and exciting movement. Come to our event in New Jersey and learn about us. Check us out on the website, cpiusa.org. All right. So now we're going to start answering questions. And there were a number of questions that came in before the show even started. And then there have been some big questions that have come in today. So yeah, we're just going to boom, boom, boom. We're just going to hit them. We're going to hit them. All right. So one guy said, thank you for sharing your knowledge and ideas. Well, you're very welcome. That's what I do here every night. I really do enjoy these streams. I haven't been doing them as much because I'm focused on building our big event coming up in New Jersey. But there you go. Now, Richard, aka Unanimous, has sent a lot of questions tonight. So we're going to try. I'll try to give you a substantial answer to all your questions, Richard, but I'm going to do my best. You asked a lot. So here we go. Please remind us of why supporting the Iranian color revolution is long-term a bad thing. Why all the bullshit about Iran not being a democracy or bad for women's rights, accusations that are true, must reiterate Iran's support for trade relations with Venezuela, Cuba. Okay, I've spent a long time in Iran. I have a documentary film about what life is like in Iran. Look, Iran needs reform, and they're the first ones to tell you that, right? That they need to improve in certain areas. They'd like to have more freedom of speech. They'd like to have more human rights, but you're not going to get reform with a U.S. color revolution. I mean, look at all the countries the USA has invaded and overthrown. Is Libya better off? Is Iraq better off? Is Afghanistan better off? I mean, name any country where the USA intervened. Haiti. How many times has the USA overthrown the Haitian government? Is it any better off? Right? U.S. regime change wars generally don't get better. That said, Iran does need reform. Now, as far as the democracy, Iran is very open about the fact that they are not a pure democracy. And I this is actually one of the most enlightening political conversations I've ever had. When I was in Iran, the Iranians, they said, we're not a pure democracy, right? We're guided. Our democracy is guided. So is yours, Caleb. In America, you don't have a pure democracy either. In Iran, all the candidates can run for office, but before they get on the ballot, there's a group of people called the Guardian Council that approve them, right? And they're leaders of the Islamic Revolution, Islamic clerics, and they approve or disapprove candidates. And if a candidate is deemed to not be a good Muslim, to not be in line with the Islamic Revolution, they don't get to run for office. And they said, you have the same thing in America. It's called Wall Street. If a candidate is deemed to be against the interests of the American system and capitalism and against what Wall Street wants, they don't get to run, right? And, we've seen that pretty blatantly. Bernie Sanders is pretty mainstream. He just wanted us to have free healthcare, and they rigged the primary against him. And the mainstream media and Wall Street decides who's a real candidate and who doesn't. And I said, so which is better? If you're going to have a guided democracy, is it better to have your democracy guided by whoever happens to have the most money? Or is it better to have the democracy guided by the people who led your revolution against colonialism and imperialism and presided over the economic rebirth of your country? I couldn't argue with them. It's true. And that really we're not going to have pure democracy until society has a huge amount of wealth, and until we have a society in which there's so much wealth and abundance that most people can even bother to take on the business of government. Right? That's the only way to have really pure democracy, is everyone has to be involved in governing, and most people can't. They're just trying to pay their bills and get by. They might vote, once a year or whatever, but that's it. Right? Well, real democracy can't really come about until you have a more prosperous society with a lot of wealth and abundance, etc. But until we get there, the democracy is going to be guided. So is it better for it to be guided by people who happen to just have the most money, or by people that come out of an anti-colonial revolution? I thought that was a good point. I'm not a Muslim. I'm not in agreement necessarily with a lot of the principles of the Islamic Revolution. I mean, a lot of it sounds good to me. Not capitalism, but Islam, neither East nor West, construction, jihad, building up the country. I mean, there's some things about the Islamic Revolution that are good, but, maybe when it comes to women and certain aspects of the Islamic system and all that I'm not a Muslim, I don't agree with. But, I mean, if it's a question of either or, should it be ruled by whoever just happens to have the most money or the Islamic Revolution? I mean, there you go. And yes, there are things about Iran's system when it comes to women that are unfair. For example, women's testimony doesn't count as much as men's in court. That's true. Their rules around domestic violence are a little bit outdated, and a little bit old-fashioned, you could say, a little bit more, traditional. That said, there are things about Iran that completely don't match that. For example, there's way more women in the Iranian parliament than there are women in the American Congress. There are women in Iran that are generals in the army. Right? They have whole women's divisions of the army that are, I was in Iran, and I went to, a museum. They have all these photos of the women's militias, of these women, in black headscarves with AK-47 rifles. They got posters of Layla Khalid, the Palestinian female liberation fighter, everywhere. The supreme leader of Iran said it's actually an atrocity, a crime for women to be denied education, and that today there are more women in the Iranian university system than men, because you have to test in for your spot, and more women test in. Women just have higher test scores. So there's things about Iran that it doesn't fit, right? Everything that Americans think about Iran is true about Saudi Arabia. Until recently, women in Saudi Arabia weren't allowed to drive cars. Women drive cars in Iran all the time, right? In Saudi Arabia, you don't get to vote. You just have a king. In Iran, women vote. Women are elected officials. There's way more elected officials than, women in Iran than there are in America. It's complicated. Like most things in life, there are nuance to everything, right? I'm not here to tell anybody what the most perfect way to view issues of gender is. I'm not, right? I mean, who am I? I'm a man living in America. I have my understanding. But, and I mean, I can only speak to my own experience and my own culture and all of that. And, there are things about the Islamic system that you could say don't match our Western understanding of what gender equality is. But that said, there are other issues. So I don't know. I just, I don't know. And, I will say this. There's a layer of rich people in Iran who don't support the revolution, even though a lot of them, their wealth, they wouldn't be rich unless it was for the revolution, right? If Iran's, hadn't had an anti-colonial revolution where they nationalized the oil, they wouldn't have been wealthy. But I've walked around the wealthy neighborhoods of Tehran, and I've talked to some of these rich people, and they love America. And a lot of these rich Iranian kids are convinced that Iran would become America if they just overthrew the Islamic Republic. And, most of Iran doesn't agree with that. And in fact, even a lot of the older people in Iran who are against the regime, against the government, they don't agree with that. And they remember how awful and traumatic the Islamic Revolution was, the terror and the executions and all that. They don't want to go through that again. They look at all the countries the USA invades and all the destabilization. They don't want that again. I mean, it's like, again, does Iran need to change and improve? Sure. They need reform, etc. But at the same time, is a color revolution in which the USA destabilizes the country going to improve that? No. And that Iran's government is an anti-imperialist, anti-monopoly government, right? That broke Iran out of imperialism and built the country up. And the level of development is massive. They've electrified the whole country. They've wiped out illiteracy. They have universal employment. You're guaranteed a job in Iran. There is no unemployment unless it's voluntary. There are like young people who don't have jobs because they don't want, the government job that you can get that pays you low money. But, but there is guaranteed employment. Basically, if you want a job, there's an office where you can go and get a job. They got free healthcare. They got free university. I remember when I was in Iran, I had these crazy conversations with some of these Iranian doctors. They couldn't believe it. They didn't realize. They said to me that, I said to them, is healthcare free in Iran? They said, yeah, but if you want to go to a fancy private hospital, it's not free. And a lot of the richer people go to fancier hospitals. I said, okay. And I said, well, in America, there is no free healthcare, and people lose their homes and lose their jobs, lose their homes and go into debt and all this just to get medical care. And they're like, that's crazy. That's outrageous. That's because they wanted to go to a fancy private hospital. I said, no, that's, to get basic medical care. They were surprised. They also, in Iran, education is free at public universities, public schools. It's free. If you test in, you get in there. And I said, well, in America, people go into debt. They spend 10, 20 years paying off their education. And they said, yeah, but that's because they wanted to go to some fancy private school. And I said, no, even at public universities. They're, again, shocked, right? These things are, it's not that simple. Anyway, I could talk about this all night. But yeah, watch my film that I made about Iran. Is Iran perfect? No. Are these countries perfect? No. There's corruption, there's issues, and their level of development is not ours, right? I mean, as much as things in the United States are deteriorating and the country is gradually destabilizing, these countries have been rising up from poverty and industrializing just in the 20th century, whereas the West has been, at the top of the world for the past 200 years. So it's a little bit more complicated. But one thing you got to say, and this is true for Iran, this is true for Russia, this is true for China, this is true for all of the countries that have had anti-colonial revolutions, whether it was a communist revolution like in the Soviet Union, or whether in China, whether it was an Islamic revolution like Iran, right? That, in Cuba, right? They've had a socialist revolution, these countries, right? They have achieved what they've achieved without colonialism. Think about that. In order for America to be as wealthy as America has been for the last 200 years, millions of people had to die being dragged here in chains from Africa. Millions of people who were Native Americans who were living here had to die and be forcibly removed and genocided. Millions of people had to be worked to death in sweatshops. Millions of Irish people had to die, laying the railroad. There was like a pile of dead bodies, a huge pile of dead bodies millions and millions of people had to die big chunks of Africa and Asia and South America had to be seized. People had to be enslaved and killed in mass to make the West where it is today. And it took 200 years. Whereas Soviet Union, Russia, they've only been industrializing since 1917, and there was no colonialism. And in fact, one of the problems the Soviet Union had is they practically bankrupted themselves helping other people industrialize, building power plants in Eastern Europe, building the Aswan Dam, the largest hydroelectrical facility in the Middle East, building, railroads in Africa, etc. The Soviet Union built itself up into an industrial superpower by the 1930s, rebuilt themselves, eventually launched, invented space travel, and they did it without colonialism. They didn't have to go to a big chunk of Africa and kill millions of people and drag them to Russia to be slaves. They didn't do that. They didn't do it. It didn't happen. Right? You can be critical of gulags, you can be critical but there was no mass genocide in order to make Russia what it is today. You can argue they violated human rights, you can argue about famines and stuff like that, but they did not go to other parts of the world and colonize them and impoverish them and enslave the people in order to make Russia what it is today. It just didn't happen. Same with China. Right? Again, you don't like the Great Leap Forward and all of that, but China didn't go grab a big chunk of South America and steal all the land and steal all the people and kill them and drag them back to China. They didn't do that. China built itself up on its own steam. Same with Iran. Iran is fully electrified, wiped out illiteracy, modern country, and they didn't have to go grab a big chunk of Africa or Asia or Latin America. They didn't go grab a big chunk of Europe and enslave all the people and drag them to Iran. They didn't do that. So, you look at these countries in the developing world and you see that they're not where the West is at, but the West has been doing this for 200 years. They've only been doing it for maybe 100 years. They've only been industrialized, and they industrialized without colonizing and terrorizing and killing millions of people in other places. So it's a little bit different. Right? If they're able to do that in a way that you don't commit mass genocide and you don't colonize and exploit people all over the world in order to do it, and you're doing it for a lot shorter time, you haven't had 200 years to do it, cut them some slack. I would much rather that countries industrialize without colonizing and exploiting other people. And that's one thing that drives me crazy about all these people that give this body count. Communism killed a gajillion, gamillion people, right? Well, it's like how many gajillion, gamillion people died just to create capitalism, right? You could not have had capitalism without the Spanish going and colonizing South America and the wealth that then trickled back into you. Couldn't have had capitalism without the slave trade. You couldn't have capitalism without seizing the Americas, without clearing the commons and committing genocide in Europe and driving the peasants off their land. And I mean, it was like capitalism began with a period of mass theft called the primitive accumulation. And there were like millions and millions and millions and millions of people killed just to generate enough wealth in feudalist Europe to lay the foundation for the market to emerge and for people to talk about the rights of man and all of that. So it's like when people want to give you this body count for communism, it's just like, that's just so ridiculous on so many levels. We can criticize communism, but how many people died in the Russian Revolution? It's nothing compared to the kind of people, the millions, the mass death that was required to create capitalism. All right. Okay. That was Richard's first question. All right. Next question. It's from Gavin. Should we pray for Marco Rubio or wash our feet in his blood? Both are biblical. Oh boy. Well, I'm not a Bible scholar, but my general feeling is that if you ever want vengeance on somebody else, that hurts you. That gets you into a bad spiritual place. And when you want vengeance on somebody else, when you wish somebody else ill will, that's a bad place. And that if you can pray for your enemy, if you can want your enemy to change his ways, that is a good place to be spiritually, but it's a hard place to be. But if you can be there, a lot of people think, and that's part of this gangsta thing that, young people do. And it's not just, please don't interpret this as a criticism of black culture. It's not a black thing. It's a white thing, right? White people were gangsters, right? Al Capone and all of that. I mean, it's like there's nothing particularly black about it. That's racist. If you say that gangster is just a black thing, that's racist. But criticizing it in general, I think, is general. And many black people feel that gangster culture and the way that that's been identified in the public mind with black culture is actually very detrimental to black people. So I'm not criticizing black people. I'm criticizing gangster culture of any kind, which, you know, is very big among white influencers on the internet. They all act like gangsters. One problem with gangster culture is that people conflate vengeance and getting revenge on other people and taking other people down with strength. And it's not. Strength is turning the other cheek. Strength is forgiving somebody. Strength is learning to find common ground with somebody you might disagree with. Strength is reconciliation and people coming together. That's what real strength is. And that's a hard thing for people to realize because that's not how Hollywood talks about it. But that's the truth. And if you look at it, you know, in the New Testament of the Bible, I believe one of the epistles from Apostle Paul, he says, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If your enemy is thirsty, give him drink. And in doing so, you will be casting fiery coals upon his head, right? And that if you really want to defeat the spiritual evil within someone, show them that you have the capacity to love in a way that they never could, right? You know, and that's a hard thing to understand, but you know, I mean, that doesn't mean, again, you know, again, people, you have this emotional reaction. I'm not saying people don't have the right to defend themselves, and that's very different. Self-defense, and every revolution in history has been an act of self-defense. Keep in mind, left adventurism and terrorism and assassinations, that's not what revolutions are. Revolutions are when people come together and begin to assert their needs, and they face violent repression from the state, and they have no choice but to defend themselves and defend their democratic rights. That's what a revolution is. Let's be real. And that it's not vengeance, and that one of the main jobs of a revolutionary movement is to kind of hold back the masses from engaging in acts of vengeance, because that tends to happen. And actually, there was a lot of vengeance during the Cultural Revolution in China, where people were taking revenge on people for what their ancestors did or what their family did before the revolution. And there was a lot of vengeance in the immediate aftermath of the Cuban Revolution, a lot of executions. And even people that maybe were on the winning side of that feel that's not a good part of their history. That's a painful thing, right? You know, let's talk about an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. And that, you know, when Fidel Castro, there was a lot of executions in the aftermath of the Cuban Revolution. And even Fidel Castro's strongest supporters say that was not a good time in our history, when a lot of the people that were part of the old regime were being, you know, sent before firing squads. And we would get lists of people that were getting shot. Every night we'd turn on the radio and they'd list off all these different people that got shot. That was awful. It was horrible. It's a traumatic thing. Even if you hated all those people, it's still a traumatic thing to live through, right? And to experience, right? So, you know, vengeance is not a healthy place to be. It's not, but people have the right to defend themselves. And as people come together and build organizations, they will defend themselves. And, you know, I'm not a pacifist, right? But I am very much someone who does not believe in a vengeful mindset, and that there is a huge amount of the vengeful mindset on the internet, right? Look, a lot of these young influencers that are performative, that's all they are, right? It's like, oh, they're getting into beefs with people, and it's just childish and stupid, right? Look, I'll tell you one thing, right? A lot of people ask me, and it always comes up, and they do it on purpose. It's like a campaign of psychological warfare that they wage against me and CPI. A lot of people will come in the chat or in the comments and ask a question about a certain organization that shall not be named. And every time people ask about that organization, right, that basically is just a mimicry of what CPI was doing 2 or 3 years ago. They basically took what CPI was doing 2 or 3 years ago and turned it into a cheap social media brand. And people ask me, well, why, what, you know, what about them, Caleb? Why don't you just, you know, what's going on with them? Well, first of all, we reached out to them and they were really nasty and rude and don't want anything to do with us. So what are we supposed to do? But second of all, right, if they were serious, they would want to work with us. If you look at my end of the year video and all the stuff CPI does, If you were serious about wanting peace with Russia, if you were serious about wanting peace with China, if you were serious about supporting Venezuela, and there was an organization doing all the amazing work that CPI was doing, why wouldn't you want to get along with us? But they don't, because they're just a brand. They're just a social media brand. And you watching this right now is taking views away from them. They're just grifting on the internet, right? They're just grifting on the internet. It's just internet performance. And I believe it is boosted by the FBI to keep you out of doing real activism. They want you just sitting on your phone listening to them, right? And it's that simple, right? And if they were serious, if they were a real organization, they would see what we're doing. We're actually doing real anti-imperialist organizing. You know, you look at the end of the year video, I mean, all the stuff we've done, they would want to get along with us. But they would want to do what we're doing. They don't. So, you know, I mean, that right there tells you they're not serious. And I mean, there's not much more to it. And yeah, they're very vengeful and they're having beefs and they're doing childish, ultra masculine performance, but they're not serious. Right. And it's that simple. Right. If they were serious, they would want to get along with us. They're basically just ripping off our message and saying it badly. And so if they were serious about doing it, they want to get along with us, but they're not. They just want to be internet famous. So good luck. And the FBI is boosting them probably because of the fact that they want you watching them on your phone and not being involved in real organizing like CPI is doing. We're building a real movement. They're not. All right, enough said. So now Richard bought like 3 more coffees. Oh boy, my voice is starting to give out here. So, and I've got a lot to do. So let me just. Richard said, "Who's worse off these days? The Shahs of Sunset Park, the Venezuelan Gusanos? Because right now they're both pissing me off. They literally more Zionist." I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's a layer of people like that. I think what's really important, if you confront one of these people, and I will say this again, this is what I did today when I confronted the Venezuelans. This is what I did when I confronted Sa Ing-wen. I'll put that video on here in a second. You have to do it from a patriotic perspective, and you have to do that. When I confronted them, I said, Americans like me are going to die in Venezuela. I didn't say... I did talk about the Venezuelans, but I didn't frame it that way. I made it, you guys are foreigners and you're trying to get us into a war for your own agenda in Venezuela and not America. That's how you have to confront these people. I'm telling you that. If you confront these people with, I know more about your country, most people are just going to look on, well, they're from there. And that's dumb, right? Because they don't represent the majority of their people, but most people don't understand that. But you have to frame it, and that's the way we should frame it. They're foreigners. Venezuela is not our fight. It's not. Why should Americans die so that their team can take over Venezuela, right? It's not our business. And they don't really love America. Wanting America to get into a war, and coming to America and lobbying our government to get in a war in your country, that's not loving America. That's how you need to frame it. Right. And of course, will Brian Becker and the woke left ever frame it that way? Of course not. Why? Why would they do that? That's racist. That's how you need to frame it. And when I confronted Sa Ing-wen of Taiwan on the streets of New York City, right? That's how I framed it, right? Stop selling war in our country. This is how you need to confront these people. This argument will shut them up. If you act like you know more about the country, when you do, which you do, but to most people, it looks like, oh, you're just an arrogant American, and they always play that. You just have to say, why are you trying to take America into your agenda, right? America first. It's not our business. Right? This is how I confronted when the so-called president of Taiwan, Tsai Ing-wen, came to New York City to lobby America to get into a war with China. This is how CPI confronted her.
This does not represent what the American people want. All the polls show that the American people don't want a new war. The American people are sick and tired of our money being wasted on bombs and weapons and destruction, provoking a war with China, provoking a war with Russia, while our trains are derailing, people in the United States are suffering, our water's not being purified, our railroads are falling apart, our power grids are falling apart, and yet we pour more and more weapons and money into some stupid confrontation with China. China is not our enemy. Wall Street bankers are our enemy. No more provocations against China. China is not our enemy. 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 Get out of our country. Stop trying to sell war in our country. Stop trying to sell war in our country. We don't want a new war with China. We love America and we don't want a new war with China. China is not our enemy. Stop trying to sell war. Get out of our country. Stop trying to sell war. China is not our enemy. I'm a patriotic American. I love my country and I don't want World War III.
Yeah. Yeah. And I said that. I didn't pretend I know more about China and Taiwan than she does. I didn't try to give a lecture about geopolitics and the achievements of the Chinese Communist Party. I said, get out of my country. Stop trying to drag my country into a war. That's not what America needs. That shuts them down. That shuts them down, right? You just make an America first argument. And the same with Israel and Palestine, right? It's not our business. What the hell are we doing? Sending all Americans don't have health care. Americans are losing their jobs, and we're sending all this money to Israel so they can commit war crimes. Not our business. You know, if you just frame it that way, right? Frame it that way, right? And then, you know, because the argument that these people always make, they always make the argument, well, we're from there. You don't have the right to tell us about it. You're white. You know, suddenly they believe in identity politics. Suddenly shut up white man applies. These people are all Republicans usually, you know, but somehow they get woke immediately when you confront them. Oh, you can't tell me. So don't. Just tell them about America and play the you're a foreigner card on them, which you're not supposed to do, right? As a leftist, you're never supposed to do that. That's racist. Well, no, it's not racist, right? I'm not against them because of their race. I'm against them because they came to my country and are now trying to lobby my country to get into a war that is in their country, that is not for the benefit of the people in my country, right? People from Iran who don't like the government of Iran came to America, and instead of saying America should do what's in the interest of American people, said America should spend millions of dollars to go back to Iran and kill people in Iran that I don't like. I don't agree with that, right? There are people from Cuba. Again, I'm not against them because they're Cuban. I'm against them because they came to America, and instead of saying America should do what's best for Americans, they said America should spend millions of dollars trying to go back to Cuba and go after people in Cuba who I don't like. Well, no, I don't agree with that. And I think most Americans would agree. If you live in America, you should be advocating policies that benefit America, not advocating policies that benefit your team in another country. Leave it at that, right? You don't have to lecture people about geopolitics. You don't have to give them a whole history of the country. Just leave it at that, right? These people are advocating that Americans get shot and killed on the streets of Venezuela, that American taxpayer money go to fund Israel, that American money go be used to overthrow the Iranian government, that America spend millions of dollars to fight Russia in Ukraine, when they themselves, if they really believe that, why aren't they in Ukraine? Why aren't they fighting in Zelensky's army? Why are they over here? Every time I meet a Ukrainian, I'm like, oh, that's funny. I see these Ukrainians out there with Ukrainian flags. Yes, send more money to Ukraine. It's like, well, God, why don't you go to Ukraine, right? You're a draft dodger. Why are we listening to draft dodgers to set our Ukrainian policy, right? And, I think most Americans would agree that these people have no right to tell us how we should run our country. It's not America's job to go support their team in their homeland. It's America's job to work in the interest of American working people. So there you go. There you go. That's the way I like to frame it, Richard. I hope that's helpful, right? Okay. It's the same question again. He said, isn't protesting ICE good, or the deployment of the National Guard? It's a good cause, saying these people should be building up cities, not waging a counterinsurgency against Americans. I don't think that's what ICE is doing. I mean, ICE is doing illegal things, okay? And my issue with the ICE protest, I'm horrified by a lot of what ICE is doing. I don't approve. But at the same time, the problem that I have with the protest, and I know there are good members of CPI that strongly disagree with me in different ways too. There are some members of CPI that are much more pro-ICE than I am. There's some members of CPI that are really, really anti-ICE and think I'm underplaying it. I'll just tell you my perspective. ICE is breaking the law, right? They're arresting American citizens. In fact, one of the main groups of people they're targeting are people who've already had their visas approved, right? In fact, it's like people sign up and they go through the process, and then ICE grabs them and holds them in detention. I mean, it's unbelievable what they're doing. They're breaking the law. You know, they're not just enforcing immigration law. They're going after people that are in the country legally. They're going after people that are following the law and following the process and targeting them. They are grabbing American citizens. The Supreme Court stepped in and said, Trump, you can't send people to prison camps in El Salvador. ICE is doing horrific things. We can't talk about any of that, thanks to PSL, thanks to Brian Becker. No, every anti-ICE protest is, no one's illegal. We're living on the stolen land of Native Americans. America's a racist country. Oh, and that just gives a blank check to ICE. And if the issue is, should we enforce immigration law, you're going to lose the argument. Most people think that America as a country has to have immigration laws and has to enforce them. That's what most people think. You're going to lose the argument. The thing is, ICE is breaking those laws. Why can't we have a debate about ICE breaking the law? But we can't. Instead, we have a debate about America being a racist country. And if you're not in the woke club, if you're not in Brian Becker's little protest club, you're not going to be persuaded by that argument, right? I am much more ICE is breaking the law. Let's stop ICE from breaking the law, but we can't, because as soon as people start protesting ICE, it's led by these crazy woke people who say, I see signs, America should have open borders now. And I see those signs and I'm thinking, like, even if we allowed every person to come in, no visas, we would still take their ID. We'd still stamp their passports. Oh, no communist country has open borders. What are you talking about? That just sounds crazy to most people. And this is what the woke left does. It's like this moralist grandstand. They take a position that is crazy, that doesn't make sense to most people. And most people hear it and they think you're crazy. And then they just puff themselves up. Yes, I want no borders. Well, to most people, that sounds crazy. So why are you taking that position? And most people are going to be like, well, I do think America should have borders. And you just sound crazy. But in your little internet bubble, yes, I'm so righteous. I want no border. Another one, abolish the police. Really? Abolish the police. All right. So there's a pedophile in the neighborhood molesting all the little boys. What do we do about it? Right? We just have to let him keep going because we abolish the police. Well, if you actually press the abolish the police people, what they mean is, well, we should set up a community police force. We should set up a police force that actually serves the needs of the community. That's not abolishing the police, my friend. That just means you want socialism. You want communism. That's what you mean. You just want a working class government. So why don't you say that? Well, don't say abolish the police. Say we want a working class government. That's what communists have been saying. Why don't you say that? Because that doesn't confuse people, right? It's like you want to confuse people. You want people to disapprove so you can go, see, I'm so much more woke than you. I'm so much more anti-racist than you. You don't even want to abolish the police. Oh, look at me. I am so much better than you. But you're saying something that most people think is cuckoo. And if you don't even really want to abolish the police, you just want good police that serve the working class, why don't you say that? Say something that makes sense to most people. But they don't. It's like, it's all right. And then they move the goalpost. This is one of my favorite ones, right? Is that they change their position, right? So land back. What does land back mean? What does it mean? Right? If land back means indigenous people have a right to their sovereignty, I'm for it. If land back means that indigenous people should receive some kind of compensation for what they've suffered historically, I'm for it. If land back means every white person should be deported from North America, I'm against it. If land back means privatizing public lands in Canada so that George Soros can make money, I'm against it. Tell me what land back is. Well, they never want to tell you what it is. And sometimes land back means stuff that I think is fine. And sometimes land back means absolutely crazy things. And sometimes it actually does mean government policies that are privatizing government land for big corporations. But you're never allowed to ask what it is. They say land back. And it just sounds so woke and progressive. And if you don't immediately go, yeah, I'm for that, I'm not racist, then they immediately shout at you. Well, no. If you're putting forward a policy, we should be able to ask what it is. And you shouldn't be able to move the goalpost about what it is. You put forward the policy, and I'll tell you whether I'm for it or not. But no, we're not playing this game where you must agree to it because you're white. And as a white man, you have no right to. No, if you're advocating a policy, tell me what it is. and I'll tell you whether I support it or not. And I there's all of this performative, you have no right to tell me I'm so shut up. I'm so tired of it. I'm telling you, I've lived with this my whole adult life, and I there's no common sense, right? These people, I'll let you in on a little secret. The left are professional losers, and they are professional losers, and I'm not even being hyperbolic here, right? First of all, I'll tell you how the left are professional losers. You know why? How many Stalinists are there on the left? Very few. Very few people on the left like Stalin, right? There's there's Grover Furr, Progressive Labor Party, I don't know, some Enver Hoxha people. That's it. Why? They don't like Stalin. How many people on the left love Trotsky? Woo! Everybody loves Trotsky. You know why? He lost. He died. He lost in the Soviet Union. He died. They all love Trotsky. Rosa Luxemburg. How popular is she? Woo! Everybody loves Rosa Luxemburg. Rosa Luxemburg was great. I quote her a lot. But why do they all like her? Because she died. Spanish anarchists. Why do they love Spanish anarchists so much? Because they lost and they died. The left can't stand Fidel Castro, brutal communist dictator. They can't stand Stalin, brutal authoritarian. They can't stand Mao, evil authoritarian. They can't, especially Deng Xiaoping. Oh my God. But if you just epically lose, you were the good one. If only you had come to power, it would have been real socialism. It would have been democratic socialism, not like the kind in the New York Times. Oh, it's unbelievable. They only like losers. If you win, suddenly they're triggered. I think he's trying to start a cult. I think he's a dictator. I think he's authoritarian. It's like it's libidinal and Oedipal, right? They're in it. They want to get their revenge on their parents. They want to punish their parents and kill their parents. They want to unleash their anger, and they're triggered by transference, by superego. They're in rebellion against morality. They don't want anyone to tell them what to do, right? And all of that. So if a leader starts to become a leader, like a superego, starts to become a figure who's offering guidance about right and wrong, they're triggered by it. Suddenly that's their parent they're rebelling against. So they don't want that. They want a leader who loses. They want to get their anger out and rebel. It's a psychological thing. Leftism has degenerated into a crude Freudian manipulation. These people are not interested in economics, right? They don't know anything about the tendency of the falling rate of profit or imperialist monopoly capitalism. It's all just libidinal and Oedipal impulses, right? They want the permanent revolution. They want to tear it down and burn it down, and they want to feel righteous, and that's all it's about for them, right? And that's how they are professional losers, because if you win, you therefore become the bully. You become the authoritarian. You become the enemy, right? And on top of that, it takes courage to defend somebody who wins. You can defend Trotsky. New York Times loves Trotsky. He was never in power. He lost, right? New York Times loves Rosa Luxemburg, but Stalin, the New York Times hates Stalin. And to defend Stalin means you have to actually stand up to the New York Times and say the New York Times lies and is wrong. Well, that takes courage. You might lose the argument in your college class. You might, So yeah, I'm just telling you, the left, the socialist and communist groups, they are professional losers. That's what they are. I'm not being hyperbolic. I am telling you, they're elated right now because Maduro's lost. He's captured, right? So it's funny. I saw at this protest, I saw the League for the Revolutionary Party. I saw the Revolutionary Communists of America. These people don't support Venezuela, right? You read their magazines, they dump on Venezuela. It's a Stalinist regime. It's authoritarian. Now they lost. Now Maduro's been arrested by Trump. He's been... So now they love Maduro. Oh, he lost. We love him. He lost. You can't make this up, right? For the last, 20, 30 years, I've been supporting Venezuela, and all these trots have been saying it's an authoritarian regime. It's not real socialism. It's Stalin. Now he lost. Now they like him. All right. Right. Now evil Trump grabbed him, which is evil. And now he lost. And now they like him. It's like, you can't make this up, right? You can't make this up. These people, look, I'll tell you one thing. In Venezuela, right? We're talking about Venezuela tonight. In Venezuela, 70s, 80s, 90s, there's been communist groups in Venezuela since the beginning. It's a Latin American country. A lot of people like Che Guevara and all that. And in Venezuela, right, Hugo Chavez got elected, and Hugo Chavez started announced he was moving towards socialism. He formed the United Socialist Party, and some communist groups merged into the United Socialist Party, and some groups retained their independence, like the Venezuelan Communist Party, but they supported Maduro. But there's a layer of communist groups in Venezuela that think nothing's changed. I kid you not. The Partido Bandera Roja, the Marxist-Leninist Red Flag Party, there's a bunch of Trotskyite groups, and they, in the 70s and 80s, they were protesting and saying, we need pure Trotskyist communist revolution. And an actual socialist revolution happened, and they started moving towards socialism and anti-imperialism and coups and all of that. And they were just saying that, nope, this isn't real. And there are literally people in Venezuela, not very many of them. It's a small minority. It's about the same size as American communist groups of weird Trotskyists and anarchists who the whole time, all this big stuff has been happening in their country, and they're just on autopilot. Just, it's like they're saying the exact same shit they said in the 70s. And no, Hugo Chavez, not real. No, this isn't real communism. It's fake. And they're just doing the same shit. And I'm telling you, a very large percentage, if we ever move toward an anti-imperialist, anti-monopoly government in America, a very large percentage of the people in America that think they're communists or call themselves communists right now will be doing exactly that. There will be all kinds of other people that will get involved, obviously. But a bunch of the people that are doing it right now, they won't support it, right? They'll immediately, nope, it's not real. And they'll just keep doing the exact same shit. There's a lot of people that this is like their hamster wheel, right? When you have a fringe, irrelevant political movement, after a while, people start to develop a mindset of we can never win. And they start to frame their worldview around we can never win. And, and so they just, they can never win. I mean, it's just, it's tragic, but, like that was part of, why I left the Workers' World Party is I started visiting. I went to Iran and I saw this is a thriving anti-imperialist country. And Workers' World Party said, no, it's bourgeois nationalist. I went to Venezuela and I said, this is a socialist country. And they said, no, it's just, it's social democracy. It's not the Soviet Union, and I just like the Soviet Union's never coming back. The Soviet model is never going to return. Anti-imperialism has moved on, and there is a real movement in this world, and they're disconnected from it. Right. And anyway, that's a long conversation, but who cares what I think anyway? I'm just kidding. Of course you care what I think. All right. Are there any more buy me a coffees? I don't see any, but are there Rumble rants? It looks like there may be Rumble. Oh yeah, there's some Rumble rants. Let's start doing Rumble rants. All right. Rumble rant number 1. Most Russians don't believe this. Leo Messi, you really need to stop with this. Okay. All right. Yeah. So, Mamdani and Kirill Dmitriev criticizing Mamdani. Look, I'm happy that Mamdani opposed the attack on Venezuela. But, it would have been nice when he was running for mayor and all these young 20-year-old socialists were campaigning, if he'd have said good things about Venezuela, then, that would have been good. But he didn't do that. He was the exciting leader of a socialist movement, and he told all these young people, oh, yeah, Venezuela is a brutal dictatorship. Well, now he's opposing it. Well, that's nice. I'm glad he's opposing what Trump is doing. But he spent his entire campaign repeating propaganda against Venezuela. I'm not impressed. And I will tell you something. There is something beneath the surface going on, right? And there's many layers to all of this. Peter Coffin and I, years ago, did a really long podcast where I talked about the role of the Communist Party USA in the fall of the Soviet Union. The DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, the Communist Party USA, committees of correspondence, those people really hate modern Russia. And it's really, really complicated. And it's about stuff that happened at the time of the fall of the Soviet Union. At the time of the fall of the Soviet Union, the Soviet Communist Party, publicly, they all believed the party line, but beneath the surface, there were two lines. There was the hardliners and the moderates. The Communist Party courted the moderates, and that's a lot of what was going on. And there was CIA stuff. I mean, they were heavily infiltrated. Angela Davis eventually quit the Communist Party in like the years following the fall of the Soviet Union. And there was a layer of people that were in the Communist Party, and they were boosting Gorbachev and supporting the moderates. Okay. And that's what they were doing. And then after the fall of the Soviet Union, the Communist Party had its convention, and like a bunch, like half the members, 2/3 of the members walked out and quit. And there was some like deep state intelligence stuff that went on. And it is weird. It is really, really, really weird. It's very weird. I don't even know what to make of it. It's very, very weird. But there is like the people who run DSA, right? DSA, the way DSA works, right? You or I, we could all join DSA. We could just get on the website, fill out a form. We're members of DSA. We're not really members of DSA. They'll call you once a year to go knock on doors for a Democrat. But there's a layer of people that are getting paid, and they're not getting paid by DSA. They're getting paid by other foundations. And they're like really in DSA. And they're paid operatives. They work for labor unions. They work for nonprofits. And those people, they're like the people that really run DSA. And they have a weird, obsessive hatred for Russia. And I don't quite understand it. Like, but they, like, whenever, I mean, for years, if I ever tried to interview them as RT, they wouldn't talk to me. Today, I was at a rally, at the Venezuela rally. And there was one guy there. And I tried to interview him, and I said, I'm RT. Oh, I won't talk to you. And I said, well, I said, we're on your side. You do realize Russia and Venezuela are like really close as countries. No, you're not. No, you're not. You're right wing, blah, blah, blah. And I said, do you know anything about geopolitics? Russia and Venezuela are very close. No, Russia's right wing, blah, blah, blah. And there is this weird, like, it's related to the fact that Putin was a hardliner, and that a lot of the hardliners became Russian Orthodox Christians. And these people, DSA was courting Gorbachev. It's related to that. There's like some weird, like, bad blood. It's not related to politics, right? It's related to some weird, like, stuff. For example, there's a woman who's very anti-imperialist on most issues. There was a woman, I'm not going to say her name, but older lady, like in her 70s, that I would see. And when the Ukraine thing first happened in 2014, I assumed she would be the perfect person to talk to. She always talked great about the Soviet Union. She'd been in the Communist Party, been in the committees of correspondence. And so I asked her take on Ukraine, and she said, no, I have nothing to say about it. I said, really? I said, why? And she said, I hope they both kill each other. I hope both sides kill each other. I hope both the Russians and the Ukrainians just kill each other. And I said, really? Like, why? And she said, well, I was over there when the Soviet Union fell, and they're all anti-Semites. They all hate Jews, and, they're all, and I was just like, damn, and this woman, when it came to Cuba, when it came to North Korea, when it came to any of these countries, she took the standard anti-imperialist line. But for some reason, and she really made a big point about the fact that she was Jewish, and this woman's not a Zionist, but, I hate them. And she had this hatred for Russians, this hatred for Ukrainians also. She wasn't pro-Ukrainian, but it was like this ethnic hatred for Russians. And I think it's about the fact that they see Putin as a hardliner, and these people were moderates. They were courting Gorbachev, and it's like they have this hatred for, they see Putin as the hardliners. These were all people that supported the coup against Gorbachev, they supported Gorbachev. They didn't support the coup against him, the arrest of Gorbachev. These people, DSA, leaders of DSA are a lot of people who quit the Communist Party when the coup against Gorbachev happened. They were supporting Gorbachev. That's committees of correspondence. That's Democratic Socialists of America. And that I think it's related to the pogroms in Tsarist Russia. It's related to a feeling that, it's because Putin's proud to be a Russian and they hate Russians. I mean, it's ethnic, right? And I think these people are kind of crypto-Zionists, and they hate Russians on an ethnic. They see Russians as Jew haters. And even though they're not Zionists, right? They're all at Palestine rallies now. They see Russia as a nation of Jew haters. They see Putin as proud to be Russian, even though Putin has been very friendly to Israel in the past. It's complicated. Putin's not an anti-Semite, but it's complicated. But yeah, I don't know. It is a very weird thing. Like Mamdani, I am sure Mamdani hates Russia. I'm sure of that, right? And he probably doesn't hate Venezuela as much as he's hinted. I mean, I'm really glad he said what he said. But I'm sure that the people that surround Mamdani, right, the DSA bosses, they like seethe with hatred for Putin. They probably don't even have an issue with China the same way. It's like a weird ethnic inside baseball related to the fall of the Soviet Union. I don't really understand it, right? Yeah. And they also have this like weird, they think Dugin is secretly controlling everything. And look, the American intelligence apparatus has its fingers in DSA and always has. So I don't know. There's many layers to all of this. And I actually haven't figured it all out and decoded it all. That's one thing I'll tell you is DSA, the people that control DSA hate Russia in a way that I haven't even quite figured out exactly. For some reason, they hate Russia. Not their ideology doesn't fit that. It's not ideological. It's not political. It's like one of the rules to be one of the DSA bosses is you must hate Russia. And so for Dmitriev to be criticizing Mamdani the way he does, that makes perfect sense to me. That makes perfect sense to me. I'm just telling you based on what I've seen, makes perfect sense. And I don't know who this guy is. You're telling me some guy who, you sent me a video. Why is he so whatever? I don't know who that is. So I can't tell you. I don't watch his stuff. All right. Next question. Funky Lollipop said, what level of blowback, if any, can the U.S. expect after the Maduro kidnapping? I honestly don't know what's going to happen next because the Venezuelan government isn't just going to fall. It's not going to fall. So I don't know what's going to happen. So we're just going to have to see what happens next because so there's that. What will happen with Cuba? Cuba's in a bad spot right now. I'll tell you that much. They've been in a bad spot for the last, period. It's actually very difficult for them in Cuba right now. They're having food shortages and things. It's almost as bad as the special period. And that's something that's not being widely reported on. And thank you, Ellie, and others who've reached out to me with that information. How can Republicans think Trump is fighting the deep state when he's taking out the last nations on earth the IMF doesn't operate on? Exactly. And I think, first of all, I want you to keep in mind the bots, the load of like Trumper bots that you're seeing don't represent most Trumpers, right? There's a wave of Trumper bots saying it's epically awesome what Trump did. Nick Fuentes is one of those Trumper bots, but but I don't think that's how all Trumpers feel. And you got to be careful with that, right? They really want you to believe that all the Trumpers are out there cheering. No, the right-wing Venezuelans are, the Miami Cubans are, certain Trumpers are out there cheering, but dissident MAGA sentiments are widespread. And that's the most important constituency in America. I cannot say that enough times, right? I cannot say that enough times. Well, hey, to his credit, he did oppose what Trump did today, right? To his credit. Okay. So, again, he talked against him on the campaign trail, but whatever. All right, folks, I have got to say goodnight. I am running out of steam. I'm way out of steam, and I've got a big day tomorrow. Hopefully not as big as today, but, hey, thanks everybody for being there. We got to just focus on building our organization. The only way stuff like this is going to stop happening is if we have a mass movement. So we have to build. We can't just react to the bad things that have happened. We've got to build. It's not easy, but we've got to build.
New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.